The train platform fell silent the moment Thomas Whitfield's eyes landed on the two bundles in Clara Rowan's arms. His face, so warm in the letters she'd cherished for months, turned to stone. "You brought children," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Not a question, an accusation. Clara's heart shattered as publicly as glass thrown against brick. She'd traveled 2,000 miles believing in promises inked on paper, believing a merchant's word meant something. But standing there with her infant twins while an entire frontier town watched her dreams crumble, she learned the cruelest truth. Some men's promises died the moment they became inconvenient. This is the story of what happened next. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The November wind cut through Clara Rowan's threadbare coat as she stepped off the train onto the wooden platform of Red Willow, Montana Territory. Her arms ached from holding the twins for the last 6 hours of the journey, but she didn't dare set them down. Not yet. Not until she found him. Thomas Whitfield, the man whose letters had promised her a new beginning. Around her, other passengers pushed past, men in dusty work clothes, women with pinched faces and calculating eyes, children darting between trunks and crates. The platform smelled of coal smoke and pine, and somewhere in the distance, a hammer rang against metal in steady rhythm. This was the frontier she'd read about in magazines back in Boston, the place where people went to reinvent themselves. She needed reinvention more than she needed her next breath. "Ma'am, you need help with those bags?" A porter, barely 16, gestured to the single worn carpet bag at her feet. "No, thank you, I'm being met." Clara forced confidence into her voice, though her stomach churned. She scanned the crowd, looking for the face she'd memorized from a single tintype photograph. Strong jaw, serious eyes, dark hair with just a touch of gray at the temples. Distinguished, she'd thought when she first saw it. Trustworthy. The porter shrugged and moved on. Clara shifted baby Emma to her other shoulder, feeling the weight of both infants pulling at muscles already trembling with exhaustion. Little James made a soft sound against her chest, not quite a cry, but close. They'd been so good on the train, miraculously good, as if they understood their mother needed them to be perfect just this once. Please God, let them stay quiet just a little longer. The crowd thinned. Passengers were claimed by waiting families, swept into embraces and exclamations. A woman in a green traveling suit was met by a tall man who swung her around like she weighed nothing, both of them laughing. Clara looked away, throat tight. She'd had that once. A husband who laughed, who made her feel light. Samuel had been gone 2 years now, taken by the fever that swept through their Boston neighborhood like divine judgment. He'd left her with nothing but debts, a crumbling boarding house room she couldn't afford, and 2 babies growing in her belly that she didn't know about until after they'd buried him. The platform was nearly empty now, just Clara and a few stragglers, and an older man sweeping scattered straw into neat piles. Then she saw him. Thomas Whitfield walked toward the platform with the careful stride of a man who measured every step, every gesture. He wore a fine wool coat, better than anything she'd seen on the other men in town, and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. His hair was exactly as she remembered from the photograph, though perhaps grayer. His face was harder too, all angles and assessment. Clara's breath caught. This was it. The moment everything changed, the moment her new life began. She adjusted her hold on the babies and stepped forward, summoning a smile that felt fragile as spring ice. "Mr. Whitfield?" He stopped 3 feet away. His eyes swept over her, her worn coat, her travel-stained dress, her wind-roughened face. Then his gaze dropped to the bundles in her arms. His expression didn't just change. It transformed, like a door slamming shut. "You brought children." His voice was flat, cold, loud enough to carry. The sweeping man paused. The porter who'd offered to help turned around. Even the couple who'd been laughing stopped mid-embrace to stare. Clara felt heat flood her face, but she kept her smile in place, kept her voice steady. "These are my twins, Emma and James. I explained in my letter, Mr. Whitfield. I was very clear about my circumstances." "Were you?" Not a question. An indictment. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. Clara recognized it immediately. Her last letter, the one she'd labored over for hours. choosing each word with surgical care. She told him everything: the death of her husband, the babies born 6 months later, her desperate need for security and a fresh start. She'd been honest because the advice column said honesty was essential in matrimonial correspondence, because she'd believed a good man would understand. Thomas unfolded the letter with deliberate slowness. His eyes scanned it, though Clara knew he must have read it before. Then he looked up at her, and his expression was so cold she actually took a step back. "You mentioned children," he said, each word precise as a scalpel. "You did not mention infants. You did not mention that I would be expected to provide for them from the moment you arrived." They're very good babies, Mr. Whitfield. They hardly cry at all, and I can work. I'm strong. I can help in your store, and I won't be a burden, I promise. A burden." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "Mrs. Rowan, I advertised for a wife, a helpmate, someone to manage my household and represent me in this community. I did not advertise for a ready-made family with another man's children." The words hit like fists, another man's children, as if Samuel hadn't been her husband, as if her babies were something shameful. Emma started to fuss, sensing Clara's distress through some mysterious infant intuition. Clara rocked her automatically, but her eyes never left Thomas's face. "You knew I was a widow. You knew... I assumed you were a young widow, someone who had lost a husband recently, not someone who..." He gestured vaguely at the twins, distaste curling his mouth. "Not someone in your particular situation." "My particular situation?" Claire's voice rose despite herself. "I'm a mother. I lost my husband to fever. These babies are all I have left of him, and they're innocent in all of this." "If you'd had concerns, why didn't you write to me? Why did you send me a ticket? Why did you let me come all this way?" "Because your letters suggested someone sensible, someone who understood the practicalities of frontier life." Thomas folded her letter and tucked it back into his pocket. "I see now that I was mistaken." The platform was silent, except for the wind and Emma's increasingly insistent whimpers. Claire could feel every eye on them. The porter pretending to organize luggage, the older man frozen mid-sweep, a group of women who'd gathered near the station house, their faces sharp with curiosity. This couldn't be happening, not after everything, not after she'd sold every possession she owned to afford the train fare that Thomas hadn't covered, not after she'd left Boston with nothing but hope and determination. "Please," Clara said, and hated the break in her voice. "Mr. Whitfield, please. I have nowhere else to go." Something flickered across his face. Pity, perhaps. Or maybe just discomfort at the scene they were creating. He glanced at the watching townspeople, then back at Clara. "That," he said quietly, "is not my problem." He turned and walked away. Just like that. No apology, no explanation beyond what he'd already given. He simply walked away, his fine coat flaring behind him, his boots clicking against the wooden platform with the confident rhythm of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. Clara stood frozen, the twins heavy in her arms. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. People didn't travel 2,000 miles to be rejected on a train platform. People didn't make promises in carefully written letters and then break them without a second thought. But Thomas Whitfield's retreating back said otherwise. Emma's whimper escalated into a full cry. James joined her a moment later, his tiny face scrunching up in distress. Clara tried to soothe them, but her hands were shaking and her vision was blurring and everything was falling apart faster than she could process it. There, she whispered uselessly. "Hush now, babies. It's all right. We'll be all right." But they wouldn't be all right. She had $17 in her reticule, one carpet bag with 3 changes of clothes and a few baby things, and absolutely nowhere to go in a town where she knew no one and had just been publicly humiliated by the man who was supposed to save her. The women near the station house were whispering now, their heads together like conspirators. The porter had abandoned any pretense of working and was watching her with naked pity. Even the older man with the broom had stopped to stare. Clara wanted to scream at them all, wanted to demand what they were looking at, why they weren't helping, how they could stand there watching a woman with 2 babies fall apart. But screaming would only make it worse, would only confirm whatever they were thinking about her. Instead, she bent down, trying to manage the twins with one arm while reaching for her carpet bag with the other. The movement was awkward, impossible really, and one of the babies, she couldn't tell which anymore through her tears, let out a shriek that seemed to echo off every building in town. For heaven's sake, someone help that poor woman. The voice cut through Clara's despair like a bell. She looked up to see a woman striding across the platform, her skirt swishing with purpose. She was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun and a face that suggested she'd seen plenty of hardship and hadn't been impressed by any of it. "You there, porter! Stop gawking and get this lady's bag." The woman reached Clara in 3 strides and, without asking permission, scooped James right out of Clara's arms. "Good Lord, child, you look ready to collapse. How long have you been traveling?" Clara's voice cracked. 3 days. From Boston." "Boston?" The woman settled James against her shoulder with the ease of long practice. He stopped crying immediately, apparently soothed by the confidence in her grip. "And that fool Whitfield left you standing here like yesterday's newspaper. I saw the whole thing. Disgraceful." "You know him?" Clara managed. "Unfortunately. Everyone knows everyone in Red Willow, for better or worse." She shifted James slightly and extended her free hand. "Martha Hale. I run the boarding house on 3rd Street, and before you start worrying, I'm not doing this out of charity. I need help with the washing, and you look like someone who knows how to work." Clara stared at the offered hand, hardly daring to believe it. I don't have much money." "Did I ask about your money?" Martha's eyes were sharp but not unkind. "I asked if you could work. Can you?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, desperate. "Yes, I can work. I can work very hard." "Good enough for me." Martha nodded to the porter, who'd finally picked up Clara's bag. "Samuel, bring that along to my place. And stop looking like you've seen a ghost. You'll catch flies with your mouth hanging open like that." The boy flushed and hurried ahead with the carpet bag. Martha waited while Clara adjusted Emma, then fell into step beside her as they left the platform. The watching women whispered louder, but Martha ignored them completely, her chin high and her stride confident. Clara followed her like a drowning woman follows a rope, hardly able to process what was happening. 5 minutes ago, her life had been over. Now this stranger, this Martha Hale, was leading her somewhere safe, offering her work, carrying one of her babies as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Why are you helping me?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it. Martha glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "You mean besides the fact that Thomas Whitfield is a pompous fool who deserves to be knocked down a peg or two?" "Yes, besides that." They turned onto what must have been 3rd Street, lined with modest but well-kept buildings. The boarding house rose 3 stories, its paint fresh and its windows gleaming even in the fading afternoon light. Martha stopped at the front steps and looked at Clara directly. "I'm helping you because 23 years ago I arrived in this town with nothing but a black eye and a small girl. Someone helped me then, even though they didn't have to. Even though everyone said I'd brought my troubles on myself, I learned something from that kindness." She shifted James again, her expression softening just slightly. "I learned that we survive by helping each other survive. Simple as that." Clara's throat closed up entirely. She couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but nod. "Now come inside before you freeze to death on my doorstep," Martha said briskly, breaking the moment. "These babies need to be fed, and you need to sit down before you fall down. We can talk about the details once you've had some rest." The boarding house was warm and smelled like bread and wood smoke. Clara stepped inside and felt something in her chest unclench slightly. Not completely, the day's trauma was too fresh for that, but enough to breathe, enough to take another step. A girl of perhaps 17 looked up from a book in the parlor. "Mama, who's this?" "This is Mrs. Clara Rowan and her twins, Emma and James," Martha said, handing James back to Clara with the same efficiency she seemed to bring to everything. "They'll be staying with us for a while. Clara, this is my daughter, Violet. Violet, stop staring and put a kettle on. Our guest needs tea." Violet scrambled up, her book forgotten. "Yes, Mama. Should I make up the room at the end of the hall?" "That would be perfect." Martha was already untying her bonnet, clearly a woman who wasted no time on transitions. "And check if we have any of that chamomile left. Mrs. Rowan looks like she could use something soothing." The girl disappeared into what must have been the kitchen. Martha gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit. I'll hold one of the babies if you need both hands." Clara sank into the chair gratefully, her legs finally giving out. Emma had stopped crying and was looking around with the wide, unfocused gaze of a very young baby. James was already falling asleep against Clara's chest, his small body relaxing into the warmth and stillness. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the boarding house, footsteps creaked across floorboards. A clock ticked on the mantel, steady and sure. Then the tears came. Clara tried to stop them, pressing her free hand against her mouth to muffle the sobs that wanted to tear out of her. But they came anyway, 2 years of grief and fear and desperate hope finally breaking through the dam she'd built to survive. Samuel's death. The baby twins she'd delivered alone in that terrible boarding house room. The months of scraping by on sewing work that barely paid for bread. The letters to Thomas Whitfield, written late at night by candlelight, crafting a version of herself that seemed worthy of rescue. All of it, all the fear and effort and hope, had led to this, crying in a stranger's parlor while her babies slept and the man who'd promised her everything walked away without looking back. Martha didn't try to comfort her, didn't offer platitudes or tell her things would be fine. She simply sat in the chair opposite and let Clara cry, her presence solid and undemanding. When the worst of it had passed, when Clara could finally breathe again without hitching, Martha spoke. "Better?" Clara nodded, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "I'm sorry, that was necessary," Martha interrupted. "And nothing to apologize for. God knows you've earned a cry after what you've been through today." "I don't know what I'm going to do." The words came out small, lost. Clara hated how she sounded, but she couldn't seem to help it. I really thought this would work." "Of course you did. Why wouldn't you? He wrote to you. He made promises. You had every right to believe him." Martha leaned forward slightly. "But now you're here, and here's where we start figuring out what comes next. First things first, you and the babies have a room here for as long as you need it. The rent is $3 a week, but you can work that off with laundry and kitchen help. Fair?" "More than fair." Clara felt fresh tears threatening and blinked them back hard. "Mrs. Hale, I don't know how to thank—" "Then don't try. Thank me by showing up tomorrow morning ready to work." Martha's tone was brisk, but her eyes were kind. "You'll find I'm not a hard woman to work for, but I expect effort. The boarders here are mostly working men, miners, ranch hands, the occasional merchant passing through. They need their clothes washed, their meals cooked, their rooms kept clean. Can you manage that with 2 babies?" Clara thought about the last 2 years, sewing 18 hours a day with the twins in a basket at her feet, walking miles to deliver finished work because she couldn't afford the streetcar, doing everything with 2 babies because there was no one else to help. "Yes," she said firmly, "I can manage it." "Good." Martha stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Violet will show you to your room. There's a cradle up there that should work for both babies if you nestle them in tight. Supper's at 6. Nothing fancy tonight, just stew and bread, but there's plenty of it." Clara struggled to her feet, holding the twins carefully. "Mrs. Hale, why did Mr. Whitfield—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish the question. Martha's expression hardened. "Why did he reject you?" "Because Thomas Whitfield is a small man who wants to look big. He wanted a wife the way other men want a new horse, something that makes them look successful, that reflects well on them in front of the other shopkeepers. A young widow with dead babies? That would get him sympathy, maybe even admiration for his charity. A young widow with living babies? That's just messy. That's work and expense, and explanations he doesn't want to give." "But he knew? He knew what he chose to know," Martha said flatly. "Men like Thomas Whitfield are very good at hearing only what they want to hear. And when reality doesn't match their expectations, they blame the reality instead of adjusting their expectations." Claire absorbed this, feeling something shift inside her. The shame she'd felt on the platform, the certainty that she must have done something wrong, that she must have failed somehow. It started to crack. Not disappear, but crack. Maybe this wasn't her failure. Maybe this was Thomas Whitfield's cruelty. Violet appeared from the kitchen with a tea tray. "Room's ready, Mama. I put extra blankets on the bed and opened the window a crack for fresh air." "Perfect. Clara, go on up and get settled. Violet will bring the tea up to you. Try to rest before supper if you can." Martha was already heading toward what looked like her office, a small room off the main parlor. And Clara, welcome to Red Willow. It's not always kind, but it's honest. You'll find your way here. Clara followed Violet up narrow stairs to the second floor, then down a hallway that smelled faintly of lavender. The room at the end was small but clean, with a bed covered in a bright quilt, a washstand in the corner, and a window that looked out over the street. The promised cradle sat near the bed, worn but sturdy. "It was mine when I was a baby," Violet said shyly, setting the tea tray on the washstand. "Mama keeps it for when people need it." "It's perfect." Clara laid the twins carefully in the cradle, tucking the blanket around them. They fit together like puzzle pieces, the way they had in her womb, James's fist curled near Emma's cheek. "Thank you, Violet, for all of this." The girl smiled, transforming her plain face into something almost pretty. "Mama says everyone deserves a second chance. I guess you're getting yours." After she left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the small room. This morning, she'd woken up on a train, nervous but hopeful. She'd imagined arriving in Red Willow, imagined Thomas Whitfield's smile when he saw her, imagined the house where she'd raise her children and finally feel safe. Instead, she'd been rejected in front of an entire town, had cried on a stranger's shoulder, had accepted charity she had no way to repay beyond washing other people's clothes. But she had a room, she had work, she had her babies sleeping peacefully in a cradle someone else's mother had once used. It wasn't what she'd planned, it wasn't what she'd hoped for, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough to build on. Clara reached for the tea Violet had brought and took a sip. It was hot and sweet and tasted like chamomile and honey. Through the window, she could see the sun starting to set over Red Willow, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in this town, Thomas Whitfield was probably sitting in his fine house, eating his supper, already forgetting the woman and babies he'd dismissed on the train platform. And somewhere else in this town, Clara Rowan was making a different kind of promise to herself. She would survive this. She would work until her hands bled if necessary. She would raise her children with dignity and strength, and she would never, ever again put her fate entirely in the hands of a man who made promises in ink but couldn't keep them in person. The twins stirred in their cradle, making the small sounds babies make when they're transitioning between sleep stages. Clara set down her tea and moved to rock the cradle gently, humming a tuneless melody under her breath. Outside, Red Willow went about its evening business. Horses clopped past on the street. Someone called out a greeting to someone else. The town clock struck 6, the sound carrying clear across the cold November air. And in a small room at the end of a hallway in Martha Hale's boarding house, Clara Rowan began the slow, painful work of building a life from the ashes of the one she'd lost. She didn't know yet that the worst was over. Didn't know that the rejection that had shattered her this afternoon would eventually prove to be the best thing that ever happened to her. All she knew right now was that her babies were safe, she had a roof over her head, and tomorrow morning she would get up and start again. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The first morning came too early and too cold. Clara woke to James's hungry cry and the pale gray light of pre-dawn filtering through the frost-edged window. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The platform. Thomas Whitfield's cold dismissal. Martha Hale's unexpected kindness. She fed the babies in the dim light, her body moving through the familiar routine, while her mind tried to catch up with her new reality. This was Red Willow, Montana territory. This was the boarding house where she would work for her keep. This was the life she had now, built on the ruins of the life she'd expected. By the time she made it downstairs with both twins bundled against her chest in a makeshift sling, the kitchen was already alive with activity. Martha stood at the stove, wielding a spatula like a general's baton, while Violet moved between the table and pantry with practiced efficiency. "Good, you're up," Martha said, without turning around. "Can you manage plates with the babies strapped to you like that?" Clara looked down at the twins, then at the stack of heavy crockery on the counter. "I can manage." "Then start setting the table in the dining room. We've got 8 boarders currently, plus the 3 of us. Violet, check those biscuits before they burn." The work was harder than Clara expected, harder than washing and ironing had been in Boston. The boarding house operated on a strict schedule that didn't pause for tired muscles or crying babies. Breakfast at 6, dishes cleaned and put away by 7. Laundry started immediately after, sheets and towels boiled in the big copper tub out back, wrung by hand until Clara's shoulders screamed, hung on lines that stretched across the yard like ship rigging. The boarders were a mixed group. Most were polite enough, nodding their thanks when Clara refilled their coffee or brought fresh bread. A few were curious about the babies, asking gentle questions about their ages and names. One, a young ranch hand named Pete, who couldn't have been more than 19, always made funny faces at Emma until she smiled her gummy baby smile. But there was also Mr. Saunders, a dry goods merchant, who looked at Clara like she was something distasteful he'd found on his shoe. And Mr. Carson, who didn't look at her at all, as if acknowledging her existence was beneath him. "Don't mind them," Violet whispered on the third morning, catching Clara's expression as Mr. Saunders pushed his plate away with barely a grunt of acknowledgement. "Some men think working women are invisible. Mama says it's actually easier that way, less conversation to slow down the work." Clara wasn't sure she agreed, but she learned to move through the dining room like a ghost, pouring coffee and clearing plates without expecting thanks or even eye contact. It was better than being stared at anyway. Better than the pitying looks or worse, the speculative ones that made her skin crawl. The real challenge was the laundry. Clara had done washing before, of course, but never on this scale. Sheets from 8 beds changed twice weekly, plus towels, plus the boarders' personal clothing that they paid extra to have cleaned. Her hands were raw by the end of the first week, despite the salve Martha provided. Her back ached constantly from bending over the washboard and wringing out heavy sodden fabric. But she never complained. Every time she wanted to, she thought about the train platform, about Thomas Whitfield walking away, about how close she'd come to having nothing at all. The twins were remarkably good, considering. Clara kept them in the sling while she worked when they were small enough, then in a basket near whatever task she was completing as they grew. Emma was the fussier of the two, demanding attention with imperious little cries that suggested she already knew her own mind. James was quieter, content to watch the world with serious dark eyes that reminded Clara achingly of Samuel. "You've got your hands full," one of the boarders, Mr. Walsh, a mine foreman with kind eyes, commented one morning as Clara juggled a coffee pot and a squirming Emma. "I manage," Clara said, the words that had become her mantra. "I can see that." He paused, then added carefully, "My wife and I, we lost 3 babies before they could take a breath. Seeing these 2 thriving like this, it does the heart good." Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw the old grief in his weathered face. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Walsh. Ancient history now." But his eyes lingered on the twins with something like hunger. "You cherish them, Mrs. Rowan, every single day." "I do," Clara said softly. "I will." After he left for the mines, Martha appeared in the kitchen doorway. "William Walsh is one of the good ones," she said quietly. "Him and his wife would have made fine parents. Sometimes I wonder about God's sense of fairness, giving babies to those who don't want them and withholding them from those who do." Clara thought about Thomas Whitfield, who'd rejected children he'd never even held, and had to agree. The town itself was still largely foreign to Clara. She ventured out only for necessary errands, always hyper-aware of the stares that followed her. Word had spread about her arrival and rejection. Of course it had. In a town this size, scandal was currency, and she'd provided enough to keep the gossips fed for weeks. She felt the weight of those stares every time she walked to the general store for supplies. The whispers that stopped when she got too close. The women who turned away rather than meet her eyes. Once she saw Thomas Whitfield himself across the street, deep in conversation with another merchant. He glanced up, their eyes met for a brief second, and then he looked away as if she were a stranger. The dismissal stung worse than she wanted to admit. "Hold your head high," Martha advised when Clara came back tight-lipped and pale from these excursions. "They're watching to see if you'll break. Don't give them the satisfaction." So Clara learned to move through Red Willow with her chin up and her face carefully blank, revealing nothing of the hurt that still lived under her ribs like a bruise. She learned which shopkeepers would serve her politely and which made her wait while they helped other customers first. She learned to budget her $17 down to the penny, supplementing it slowly with the small wages Martha insisted on paying beyond room and board. "You're doing the work of two women," Martha said when Clara protested. "You'll take the money and be grateful, or I'll be insulted." 3 weeks after her arrival, on a gray December morning that promised snow, Clara was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard raised voices from the house. Not angry, exactly, but urgent. She secured the last sheet with numb fingers and hurried inside. The twins bundled in their basket near the back door. Violet met her in the kitchen, her face pale. "Mama needs you in the front parlor. There's a man. He's hurt." Clara's heart jumped. "How badly?" "I don't know. There's blood." Clara wiped her hands on her apron and rushed to the parlor. A young man, barely more than a boy, really, sat in one of Martha's good chairs, his face gray with pain. Blood soaked through a makeshift bandage wrapped around his left hand, dripping steadily onto the floor. Martha knelt beside him, her own face tight with concern. "What happened?" Clara asked, automatically moving closer. "Accident at the lumber mill," the boy gasped. "Saw caught my hand. Boss said to come here. Said Mrs. Hale would know what to do until the doctor could come." "The doctor's out at the Halverson Ranch," Martha said grimly. "Won't be back until tonight at earliest. Their daughter's been in labor since yesterday." She looked up at Clara. "I need to stop this bleeding, but I need supplies from the kitchen. Can you stay with him?" Clara nodded, taking Martha's place beside the chair. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, his face still carrying the softness of childhood under the pain-drawn lines. His hand, what she could see of it through the blood-soaked cloth, looked mangled. "What's your name?" Clara asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Thomas. Thomas Murphy." He tried to smile and failed. "Not that Thomas, though. The other one wouldn't come within 10 feet of blood." Despite everything, Clara almost laughed. "No, I don't suppose he would. How long ago did this happen, Thomas?" "Maybe 20 minutes. Took me a while to walk here." His breathing was coming faster now, shallow and quick. "Is it bad?" "I can't really feel it anymore." That was probably shock, Clara thought, her mind racing through what little she knew about injuries. She'd helped tend Samuel during his final illness, had learned to change bandages and monitor fever, but this was different. This was trauma, immediate and frightening. Martha returned with an armful of clean cloths and a bottle of what looked like whiskey. "This is going to hurt," she told Thomas bluntly. "But infection will hurt worse. Clara, hold his arm steady." What followed was brutal. Martha unwrapped the sodden bandage, revealing a deep gash across the boy's palm where the saw had caught him. Clara had to look away for a moment, swallowing hard against the nausea that rose in her throat, but she forced herself to look back, to hold Thomas's arm, while Martha poured whiskey directly into the wound. His scream brought Violet running. It brought several of the boarders, men who'd been reading newspapers or writing letters in their rooms. They crowded the doorway, useless and gawking, until Martha snapped at them to either help or leave. Mr. Walsh stepped forward. "What do you need?" "Pressure," Martha said. "And prayer wouldn't hurt. This boy's lost a lot of blood." Together, they worked to clean the wound and wrap it in fresh bandages, tight enough to stop the bleeding, but not so tight as to cut off circulation entirely. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, his face waxen. Clara found herself holding his good hand, murmuring reassurances she wasn't sure were true. "The doctor will fix you up proper," she told him. "You'll be fine." "My ma," he whispered. "Someone needs to tell my ma." "Where does she live?" "Other side of town. Little house with those blue shutters." Clara looked at Martha, who nodded grimly. "Violet can go. I need you here." So Violet bundled up and ran off into the cold while Clara and Martha maintained their vigil. The bleeding had slowed but not stopped entirely. Thomas's pulse was fast and thready under Clara's fingers. She'd never felt so helpless, watching this boy slip away and having no idea how to pull him back. "Talk to him," Martha said quietly. "Keep him here with us." So Clara talked. She told Thomas about Boston, about the sea and the ships and the markets. She told him about the twins, how Emma liked to grab at everything, and James was trying so hard to roll over. She talked until her throat was dry and the words felt meaningless, but Thomas's eyes stayed open, fixed on her face like she was an anchor. An hour passed, then another. The other boarders drifted away, back to their own concerns, though Mr. Walsh stayed nearby, ready to help if needed. Finally, as the winter afternoon was fading into early dusk, the front door banged open and a man strode in carrying a black leather bag. He was tall and lean, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that took in the scene with quick, professional assessment. "Dr. Avery," Martha said, relief evident in her voice. "Thank God. The Halverson baby arrived safely 2 hours ago. Girl, 8 pounds, healthy lungs." He was already kneeling beside Thomas, his hands moving with confident efficiency as he examined the wound. "Who did the cleaning and binding?" "I did," Martha said. "Mrs. Rowan assisted." The doctor glanced at Clara for the first time, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. His eyes were gray-blue, sharp but not unkind. "You did well, both of you. This could have been much worse." He worked quickly, removing Martha's bandages and examining the wound more thoroughly. Clara watched his hands. They were steady and sure, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of practice. His face remained calm even when he found something concerning, though his jaw tightened slightly. "The cut's deep but clean," he said finally. "No major vessels severed, thank God, though it came close. The saw blade was sharp, which is actually in his favor. Cleaner cuts heal better than ragged ones." He looked at Thomas, whose eyes were drifting closed again. "Son, you're going to keep this hand, but you'll have a scar that'll make for good stories. Can you feel your fingers?" Thomas tried to move them and winced. "Hurts." "Good. Pain means the nerves are intact." Dr. Avery began pulling supplies from his bag: needle and thread, more clean cloth, a small brown bottle. "I'm going to stitch this closed. Mrs. Hale, I'll need hot water and more light. Mrs. Rowan, can you continue to assist?" Clara nodded, though her heart was hammering. She'd never watched anyone be stitched up before, had never been this close to real medical work. But something in the doctor's calm competence steadied her. He expected her to help, so she would help. Martha brought lamps and hot water. Dr. Avery cleaned his hands thoroughly, then threaded his needle with practiced ease. "Hold the lamp close," he told Clara. "I need to see what I'm doing." She held it steady while he worked, watching as he brought the edges of Thomas's torn skin together with small, precise stitches. The boy whimpered but didn't scream, biting down on a leather strap the doctor had given him. Each pull of the thread made Clara's stomach turn, but she didn't look away. Couldn't look away. "You have a steady hand," Dr. Avery commented, not looking up from his work. "And you're not squeamish. Good qualities in an assistant." "I'm not an assistant," Clara said automatically. "I'm just helping." "Helping is assisting." He tied off another stitch. "Most people would have run from a wound like this. Or fainted. You did neither." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just held the lamp and watched his hands work their careful magic, closing the wound stitch by stitch until it was sealed. When he finished, he bandaged the hand again with fresh cloth, then sat back on his heels. "There. Thomas, you'll stay here tonight where Mrs. Hale can watch you. If you develop a fever or the pain gets worse, send for me immediately. Otherwise, I'll check on you tomorrow." "Yes, sir," Thomas managed, his voice weak but present. "And no work for at least 2 weeks. When you do go back, light duty only until I clear you." Dr. Avery started packing his supplies, his movements methodical. "Mrs. Hale, I trust you can manage his care?" "Of course," Martha said. "We'll set him up in the spare room downstairs." Dr. Avery nodded, then turned to Clara. His gaze was appraising, thoughtful. "Mrs. Rowan, isn't it? Martha mentioned you'd come to town recently." Clara felt herself flush, wondering what exactly Martha had said, what stories had already circulated about the rejected mail-order bride. "Yes, I arrived 3 weeks ago." "And you have medical experience?" "No, I helped nurse my husband before he died, and I've cared for the twins since they were born, that's all." "That's more than many have." He studied her for another moment, then seemed to come to some decision. "I could use someone with steady hands and a calm temperament. My practice has grown beyond what I can manage alone, especially during emergencies. Would you be interested in occasional work as an assistant?" The offer landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through Clara's thoughts. Work. Real work, beyond washing and cooking, work that might pay more than the pittance she earned at the boarding house. But the twins. How could she manage medical work with 2 babies to care for? She hesitated, glancing at Martha. The older woman's expression was encouraging. The babies can stay here when you're needed. Violet and I managed children while working before. We can manage again. I wouldn't need you every day, Dr. Avery added. Just for emergencies, difficult cases, things that require an extra pair of hands. You'd be paid fairly, of course. Clara's mind raced. More money meant security, meant she could save something beyond bare survival, meant she wouldn't be entirely dependent on Martha's charity, generous as it was. But it also meant being visible in town in a new way, meant people seeing her, judging her, perhaps condemning her even more for putting herself forward. Then again, they were already judging her, already whispering about the woman Thomas Whitfield had rejected. What did she have to lose by working? I'd like that, she heard herself say. I'd like to help, Doctor. Avery smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Excellent. I'll send word when I need you. For now, thank you for your assistance today. You likely saved this boy's hand, if not his life. After he left, after Thomas had been settled in the spare room with his worried mother hovering over him, after the excitement had faded and the house had settled back into its evening routine, Clara sat in her room with the sleeping twins and tried to process what had just happened. She'd helped save someone, had been useful in a way that went beyond clean sheets and hot meals, and somehow, in the middle of a medical emergency, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. A purpose, a skill, a future that might be more than just surviving. Martha knocked softly and entered without waiting for an answer. You did well today, she said, settling into the room's single chair. Better than well. Lucas Avery doesn't offer work to just anyone. Lucas? Clara raised an eyebrow. Dr. Avery, then, if you want to be formal. Martha waved a hand. I've known him 15 years. Good man. Lost his wife and daughter to cholera when they first came west. Thought he'd leave after that, go back east where the memories weren't so sharp. But he stayed. Said the people here needed him. Clara absorbed this, thinking about the doctor's calm competence, his steady hands. Why doesn't he have an assistant already? Had one, Mrs. Chen, a widow who'd learned healing from her grandmother back in China. Sharp as a tack, that woman. But she moved to San Francisco last spring to be near her son. Martha paused. Lucas has been managing alone since then. I've watched him work himself to exhaustion more than once. He needs help, even if he's too stubborn to ask for it properly. And you think I can do it? I think you handled yourself well under pressure today. I think you've got a good head on your shoulders and hands that don't shake when they need to be steady. Martha's expression softened. And I think you need to see yourself as more than just a woman who got rejected by a fool. You're capable, Clara, more capable than you give yourself credit for. The words settled into Clara's chest like warm stones. When was the last time someone had believed in her capacity, not just her willingness to work? When had anyone looked at her and seen potential instead of just desperation? Thank you, Clara said quietly. For everything, for taking us in, for giving me a chance, for being a decent human being? Martha's tone was dry. That's a low bar, child. You don't need to thank people for clearing it. But Clara did thank her and meant it with her whole heart. That night, after the twins were asleep and the house was quiet, Clara sat by the window and looked out at Red Willow's dark streets. Somewhere out there was Dr. Avery's office, where she might soon be working. Somewhere out there was Thomas Whitfield's store, though she tried not to think about that. And somewhere out there was the train platform where her life had shattered 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks. It felt like years. It felt like yesterday. But she wasn't the same woman who'd stepped off that train. That Clara had been desperate, willing to accept almost anything for the promise of security. This Clara, the one sitting in Martha Hale's boarding house, the one who'd helped stitch up a boy's hand, the one who'd been offered real work. She was different. Stronger, maybe. Or at least beginning to understand that strength had been there all along, waiting for a reason to show itself. Emma stirred in the cradle, making small sleeping sounds. James shifted closer to her, the two of them finding each other even in sleep. Clara watched them, her heart swelling with fierce protectiveness.
"We're going to be all right," she whispered to them, to herself, to the dark room. "We're going to be more than all right."
And for the first time since Samuel died, she almost believed it. The summons came 2 days later, delivered by a breathless boy who couldn't have been more than 12. "Dr. Avery needs you at the clinic, ma'am. Says it's urgent." Clara's hand stilled in the wash water. Across the kitchen, Martha looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. "Go. I'll watch the twins." "But the laundry." "We'll still be here when you get back." "Go on, before that boy passes out from running." Clara dried her hands, pulled on her coat, and followed the boy through streets already bustling with morning activity. The clinic sat on the edge of town, a modest building that had once been a residence. A sign hung above the door, Lucas Avery, M.D., Surgery and General Medicine. Inside, the air smelled of carbolic acid and something metallic that Clara recognized as blood. Dr. Avery appeared from a back room, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his face tight with concentration. "Mrs. Rowan, thank you for coming so quickly." He gestured toward the examination room. "I have a patient who needs assistance during a procedure, and my hands are full. Are you comfortable with the sight of blood?" Clara thought of Thomas Murphy's mangled hand, the way the lamp had shaken in her grip even as she'd forced herself to hold steady. "I can manage it." "Good. Wash your hands thoroughly with this soap, then join me." The patient was a woman perhaps 10 years older than Clara, her face gray with pain and her breathing labored. She lay on the examination table with her leg exposed, revealing an angry wound on her calf that wept pus and smelled of infection. "Mrs. Patterson stepped on a rusty nail 3 days ago," Dr. Avery explained quietly, his voice low enough that only Clara could hear. "Didn't think it was serious enough to warrant medical attention. Now the infection has set in deep. I need to debride the wound, cut away the dead tissue, or she'll lose the leg. Possibly her life." Clara felt her stomach drop, but she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep her calm, hold her steady when the pain gets bad, and hand me instruments when I ask for them." He indicated a tray of gleaming metal tools that looked more like torture devices than healing implements. "Think you can do that?" "Yes." What followed was the longest hour of Clara's life. She held Mrs. Patterson's hand while Dr. Avery worked, feeling the woman's grip tighten until Clara's fingers went numb. She passed him instruments with hands that wanted to shake but didn't because he needed them steady. She watched him cut away infected tissue with methodical precision, cleaning the wound until it bled fresh and red instead of the sickly ooze of infection. Mrs. Patterson screamed. She begged him to stop. She cursed him with words Clara had never heard a woman use. And through it all, Clara held her hand and murmured reassurances that felt hollow but seemed to help anyway. "You're doing so well. It's almost over. Just a little longer. You're so brave." When it was finally done, when the wound was cleaned and dressed and Mrs. Patterson had slipped into an exhausted half-sleep, Dr. Avery stepped back and released a long breath. His hands were trembling slightly, the only sign that the procedure had cost him anything. "You did well," he said to Clara, stripping off the gloves he'd worn. "Better than many trained nurses I've worked with." "I didn't do anything except hold her hand." "You did everything that mattered." He was cleaning his instruments now, his movements automatic. "Medicine isn't just cutting and stitching. It's being present with people in their worst moments. It's offering comfort when comfort is all you can offer. You understand that instinctively." Clara didn't know what to say, so she helped him clean up instead. They worked in silence, restoring order to the chaos of the procedure. When they were done, Dr. Avery walked her to the clinic door. "I'll need you again," he said. "Probably soon. The winter months are hard out here. Accidents, illnesses, childbirth complications. I can't promise regular hours or easy work." "I don't need easy," Clara heard herself say. "I just need useful." His expression shifted, something that might have been understanding flickering across his face. "Then we'll work well together, Mrs. Rowan." She walked back to the boarding house in a daze, her mind replaying every moment of the procedure. Mrs. Patterson's pain, the smell of infection, the steady movement of Dr. Avery's hands as he worked to save a leg, a life. The way he'd trusted Clara to help without questioning whether she could. Martha took one look at her face and poured her a cup of strong tea without asking. "How was it?" "Terrible. Wonderful. I don't know. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, needing its warmth. Is it always like that? The fear that you'll fail, that you won't be enough? If you're doing anything worth doing, yes. Martha sat down across from her. The day you stop being afraid is the day you've stopped caring. Lucas knows that. It's why he's such a good doctor. He never stops caring, never stops being afraid he'll lose someone. Over the following weeks, Clara found herself called to the clinic with increasing frequency. A child with croup who needed steam treatments through the night. A minor with a crushed foot that required amputation. Clara had to leave the room for that one, her composure finally breaking. A difficult birth where the mother hemorrhaged and Dr. Avery worked for 3 hours straight to save both her and the baby. Each case taught Clara something new: how to read a fever by touch, how to prepare instruments for surgery, how to talk to frightened patients in a voice that conveyed confidence even when she felt none, how to watch suffering without looking away, because looking away meant the patient suffered alone. The work was brutal and beautiful in equal measure. It left her exhausted and energized, sick with worry and humming with purpose. On the days she wasn't needed at the clinic, she threw herself into the boarding house work with renewed vigor, as if the physical labor could balance the emotional weight of medical care. But the town noticed. Of course the town noticed. Clara first heard the whispers at the general store, where she'd stopped to buy thread for mending. 2 women stood near the fabric counter, their voices pitched just loud enough to carry. Working alone with a man day and night sometimes, and her a widow with small children, it's improper. More than improper, it's scandalous. What kind of example is she setting? Clara's hands stilled on the thread she'd been examining. She forced herself to keep browsing, to pretend she hadn't heard, but her face burned. I think it's resourceful, a third voice interjected. Clara looked up to see Mrs. Walsh, the mine foreman's wife, standing near the women with her arms crossed. Dr. Avery needs help, and Mrs. Rowan is providing it. I don't see how that's anyone's business but theirs. Well, I suppose you would defend her, one of the original women sniffed. Birds of a feather, after all. Mrs. Walsh's expression hardened. And what's that supposed to mean, Judith? But Clara didn't stay to hear the rest. She paid for her thread and left, her hands shaking and her throat tight. Birds of a feather. As if helping a doctor made her somehow fallen, somehow beyond respectability. The whispers grew louder. Clara caught fragments of them everywhere. At the butcher's shop, outside the church she'd started attending, even at the boarding house when certain visitors came calling. The proper ladies of Red Willow had decided she was improper, and no amount of good work would change their minds. Martha was furious when she heard. Small-minded fools, the lot of them. Half of them have never done a useful thing in their lives, and they have the audacity to judge you for saving lives. Maybe they're right, though, Clara said quietly. They were folding laundry in the kitchen, the twins napping upstairs. Maybe it is improper. A widow working alone with a widowed man, spending hours together, doing medical work, helping people. Martha snapped a sheet with more force than necessary. If that's improper, then impropriety is the only proper thing in this God-forsaken town. But the criticism stung nonetheless. Clara found herself hyper-aware of every moment alone with Dr. Avery, every accidental brush of hands when passing instruments, every quiet conversation in the clinic after a difficult case. There was nothing inappropriate in their interactions. He was unfailingly professional, and she was careful to maintain proper distance. But she knew how it looked, knew what people assumed. The tension came to a head on a cold January afternoon when Clara was summoned to the clinic for what Dr. Avery described as a delicate matter. She arrived to find him standing in the examination room with a girl who couldn't have been more than 15, her face swollen from crying. Mrs. Rowan, this is Sarah Chen. She came to me with a private concern. Dr. Avery's expression was carefully neutral. Sarah, would you be more comfortable discussing this with Mrs. Rowan present? The girl nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, I can't tell my parents. They'll be so ashamed. What emerged was a story Clara had heard variations of too many times. A ranch hand who'd paid attention to a lonely girl. Promises made in secret. And now Sarah was pregnant, terrified, and convinced her life was over. Dr. Avery listened with grave attention, then examined her gently while Clara held her hand.
When he was done, he pulled up a chair and sat at eye level with the girl. "Sarah, you're about 3 months along. The baby appears healthy, and so do you, physically. But I'm more concerned about your emotional state and your safety. The man who did this, is he still in the picture?" "He left town 2 weeks ago." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Said he was going to find work in Butte, that he'd send for me. But he won't. I know he won't." "Then we'll proceed without him." Dr. Avery's tone was matter-of-fact but kind. "You have options, Sarah. You can tell your parents and work out a plan with them. You can seek help from the church. Or," he glanced at Clara, something unspoken passing between them, "there are women in this town who help girls in your situation. Mrs. Rowan might be able to connect you with them." Clara understood immediately. He was asking if she'd help, if she'd put herself even further in the crosshairs of town gossip by associating with an unwed pregnant girl. It was one thing to assist with medical emergencies. It was another entirely to involve herself in what many would consider a moral failing. She thought of herself at 15. She thought of the twins upstairs at the boarding house, innocent and perfect, and entirely dependent on her protection. She thought of Sarah's tear-stained face and the desperate hope in her eyes. "I'll help," Clara said. "Whatever you need." Over the next weeks, Clara became Sarah's lifeline. She spoke with Martha, who knew of a home for unwed mothers 2 towns over where Sarah could stay until the baby came. She helped Sarah compose a letter to her parents. Not the whole truth, but enough of it to explain her absence. She sat with the girl through panic attacks and morning sickness, offering the kind of practical comfort that came from her own experience with pregnancy. And the town noticed that too. "She's helping that Chen girl," Clara overheard at the post office. "You know, the one who got herself in trouble? What kind of woman involves herself in that sort of situation?" "The same kind who works alone with Dr. Avery at all hours. Obviously, she has no sense of propriety." Clara bought her stamps and left without responding, but each whisper felt like a cut. She was trying to help, trying to use her limited skills to do something good in the world. Why did that make her suspect? Why did kindness automatically suggest immorality? The answer came crashing down one bitter February morning when she arrived at the boarding house to find Thomas Whitfield standing in Martha's parlor, his expression as cold as the day he'd rejected her on the platform. "Mr. Whitfield," Martha said icily, "to what do we owe this unexpected visit?" "I'm here as a concerned citizen, Mrs. Hale." His voice carried the weight of assumed authority. "There's been talk about Mrs. Rowan's activities, her work with Dr. Avery, her involvement with certain unsuitable young women. The town council has concerns." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "The town council?" "Indeed. We take seriously the moral character of those living in Red Willow, particularly those who position themselves in roles of influence." Thomas's eyes flicked over her with distaste. "Your work at the clinic gives you access to vulnerable people. Your association with Dr. Avery gives you a veneer of respectability. Some feel this is being abused." "Abused?" Martha's voice could have cut glass. "She's helping sick people. She's offering kindness to a frightened girl. What about that constitutes abuse?" "The impropriety of it all. A woman of questionable background, working alone with a widowed man, involving herself in scandalous situations." Thomas pulled a paper from his pocket. "The council has drafted a resolution. Either Dr. Avery formally ends Mrs. Rowan's employment, or he faces censure that could affect his medical practice. We can't have the town's only doctor associated with questionable moral behavior." The room went deadly quiet. Clara felt as though she'd been struck. They were going to take this from her. The one thing she'd found that made her feel valuable, that gave her purpose beyond mere survival. They were going to take it away because she wasn't respectable enough, because Thomas Whitfield, in his wounded pride, had decided to punish her for existing. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Dr. Avery hasn't done anything wrong. I haven't done anything wrong. We're helping people." "That's a matter of perspective, Mrs. Rowan." Thomas folded the paper and returned it to his pocket. "The council meeting is tomorrow evening at 7. Dr. Avery will be expected to attend and address these concerns. I suggest you prepare yourself for the likelihood that your employment will be terminated." He left without another word,
his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor like a judge's gavel. Martha erupted the moment the door closed. "That self-righteous, hypocritical snake! He's doing this because you wounded his pride, nothing more. The moral character of Red Willow, as if he knows the first thing about morality." But Clara barely heard her. She sank into a chair, her mind racing. This couldn't happen. She couldn't lose the clinic, couldn't lose the work that had given her back her sense of self. But she also couldn't ask Dr. Avery to risk his practice for her. His work was too important, too necessary for this town. "I'll resign," she said quietly. "I'll tell Dr. Avery I can't work for him anymore. That way he won't face censure." "Like hell you will." Martha stood over her, hands on hips. "You'll do no such thing. We're not letting Thomas Whitfield and his pack of gossips dictate how you live your life." "But the council is made up of men who've never birthed a baby or stitched a wound or sat with a dying patient through the night. What do they know about the work you do?" Martha's eyes blazed. "You're going to that meeting tomorrow, Clara. You're going to stand up and tell them exactly what you've been doing and why it matters. And if they still want to condemn you, let them do it to your face." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to explain that standing up would only make things worse. But something in Martha's fierce expression stopped her. She thought about Sarah Chen, who'd been brave enough to seek help when she was terrified. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, who'd endured excruciating pain to save her leg. She thought about all the patients she'd helped over the past months, people who hadn't cared about her reputation when they needed medical care. Maybe it was time to stop trying to make herself small enough to fit into Red Willow's narrow definition of respectability. Maybe it was time to stand up and demand to be seen for what she actually was, not what Thomas Whitfield's wounded ego wanted her to be. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'll go to the meeting. I'll speak." The next evening arrived too quickly and too slowly. Clara spent the day in a fog of anxiety, going through the motions of her work while her mind churned with what she would say. Martha helped her choose an outfit, her best dress, worn but clean and pressed, and Violet offered to watch the twins. "You look proper as a Sunday sermon," Martha declared. "Let them try to call you immoral now." The town hall was already crowded when they arrived. It seemed half of Red Willow had turned out for the spectacle, curiosity and judgment written across familiar faces. Clara recognized shopkeepers and their wives, miners still dusty from the day's work, the women who'd whispered about her in the general store. Thomas Whitfield sat in the front row with 4 other men, the town council, Clara presumed, looking satisfied with himself. Dr. Avery stood near the door, his face drawn with worry. When he saw Clara, relief and concern warred in his expression. "Mrs. Rowan, you shouldn't have come. I can handle this." "No," Clara said firmly. "You shouldn't have to handle this alone. We're in this together." The meeting was called to order by Mayor Harrison, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the proceedings. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. "We're here tonight to address concerns raised by some members of our community regarding Dr. Avery's employment of Mrs. Clara Rowan. Mr. Whitfield, as the primary complainant, you have the floor." Thomas stood, and Clara had to admit he cut an impressive figure. Confident, well-dressed, speaking with the assurance of a man who'd never been told no in his life. "Thank you, Mayor Harrison. I'll be brief, as the facts speak for themselves." Mrs. Rowan arrived in Red Willow under somewhat scandalous circumstances, a mail-order bride with children she'd failed to fully disclose. Since then, she's inserted herself into situations of questionable propriety, working alone with Dr. Avery at all hours, involving herself with unwed pregnant girls, setting an example that, frankly, is not what we want for the decent women of this community. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara felt their eyes on her like brands. Thomas continued, warming to his subject. "I'm not saying Mrs. Rowan is intentionally behaving improperly. Perhaps she simply doesn't understand our standards here in the West. But we must protect the moral character of Red Willow. We must ensure that those in positions of influence, and make no mistake, working closely with our only doctor is a position of influence, are above reproach. I therefore move that the council formally request Dr. Avery to terminate Mrs. Rowan's employment immediately." "Second," said one of the other council members, a thin man with a face like a hatchet. Mayor Harrison looked pained. Dr. Avery, would you like to respond? Dr. Avery stepped forward, and Clara noticed his hands were clenched at his sides. I would. Mrs. Rowan has been an exemplary assistant. She's helped me treat dozens of patients, including several emergencies where her presence made the difference between life and death. She's shown skill, compassion, and dedication that would put many trained nurses to shame. To suggest she's behaved improperly is not only false, it's an insult to the work we do. No one's questioning your work, Doctor, Thomas said smoothly. We're questioning the appropriateness of the arrangement. A widow working alone with a widower, often late into the night. Surely you can see how that appears. It appears like medical care, Dr. Avery shot back, his calm finally cracking. It appears like a woman using her skills to help her community. What it doesn't appear like, to anyone with sense, is scandal. The crowd stirred, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads. Claire could see the council members exchanging glances, measuring the room's mood. Mayor Harrison raised his hands for quiet. Are there others who wish to speak? Martha stood immediately. I do. I've known Clara Rowan for 3 months now. She's lived in my boarding house, worked in my kitchen, cared for her children while contributing more than her share to our community. Everything Thomas Whitfield has said about her is prejudiced nonsense designed to punish her for having the audacity to survive circumstances that would have broken a lesser woman. Mrs. Hale, your friendship with Mrs. Rowan is well known, Thomas said condescendingly. Perhaps your testimony isn't entirely objective. And yours is? Martha's voice dripped with scorn. You're the man who publicly rejected her on a train platform, humiliated her in front of the entire town, and left her stranded. Forgive me if I question your objectivity, Thomas. Gasps and whispers erupted. Thomas's face flushed dark red. That situation was entirely different. It was the same situation, Martha interrupted. A woman trying to make her way in the world, and you deciding she wasn't good enough for your exacting standards. Well, here's a newsflash. Clara Rowan has helped save lives in this town. What have you done lately besides count money and spread gossip? The crowd was fully engaged now, people talking over each other, picking sides. Mayor Harrison banged his gavel uselessly, trying to restore order. And Clara realized this was her moment. If she was going to speak, it had to be now, while the room was already in chaos. While the careful facade of respectability had been cracked open, she stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. May I speak? The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her, curious, judgmental, sympathetic, hostile. Clara felt the weight of all those gazes but refused to look down. My name is Clara Rowan, she began, pitching her voice to Carrie. Most of you know me as the woman Thomas Whitfield rejected, the mail-order bride who arrived with inconvenient children, the widow who didn't have the decency to stay invisible and grateful for whatever scraps she was thrown. She saw Thomas stiffen, saw the council members shift uncomfortably. Good. Let them be uncomfortable. I came to Red Willow believing in promises, believing that if I was honest and worked hard, I could build a life here. Mr. Whitfield taught me that some promises mean nothing, but Martha Hale and Dr. Avery taught me something more important, that some people keep their word even when they haven't given it, that kindness exists without contracts, that usefulness is its own dignity. She took a breath, feeling the room hang on her words. You want to know what I've been doing these past months? I'll tell you. I've held the hands of people in pain. I've helped Dr. Avery stitch wounds and set bones and deliver babies. I've sat through the night with patients who were too sick to be left alone. I've learned to read fevers and prepare medicines and talk to frightened people in a way that brings them comfort. Her voice grew stronger, fueled by months of suppressed anger and hurt. And yes, I helped Sarah Chen, because she was a scared 15-year-old girl who needed someone to tell her she wasn't ruined, that her life wasn't over, that people make mistakes and deserve compassion anyway. If that makes me immoral in your eyes, then your morality is worth less than the dirt under my fingernails. Someone in the crowd gasped. Clara didn't care. She was past caring what they thought. You want to talk about propriety? Let's talk about it. Is it proper to let people suffer because treating them might look inappropriate? Is it proper to deny medical care to those who need it because the person providing it is a woman? Is it proper to punish someone for working, for learning, for trying to contribute to this community? She looked directly at Thomas Whitfield, saw him flinch under her gaze. I've done nothing wrong. Dr. Avery has done nothing wrong. The only improper thing happening in this room is a group of men trying to control a woman's life because they don't like that she refused to disappear when they wanted her to. The silence was absolute. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the twins' absence like phantom weight against her chest. She'd said too much, probably, had gone too far. But she was tired of being small, tired of apologizing for existing. Dr. Avery stood, moving to stand beside her. If the council insists on terminating Mrs. Rowan's employment, they'll have my resignation as well. I won't practice medicine in a town that values reputation over human life. The crowd erupted. Several people stood, voices rising in protest and support. Mayor Harrison's gavel banged frantically, trying to restore order that was fully lost now. And then, cutting through the chaos, came a voice Clara had learned to trust over the past months. There's another option. Dr. Avery's words were quiet, but somehow they carried. The room settled, people straining to hear. He turned to face Clara fully, his gray-blue eyes steady on hers. Mrs. Rowan, I've watched you work. I've seen your dedication, your skill, your compassion. I've trusted you with my patients' lives because I know you'll protect them as fiercely as I would. You're not just my assistant. You're my partner in this work, and I can't imagine doing it without you. Clara's heart hammered. Where was he going with this? But if the town requires formality to accept your presence, then let's give them formality. He took a breath, and Clara saw his hands tremble slightly before he steadied them. Clara Rowan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The room exploded into shocked exclamations and frantic whispers. Clara stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Dr. Avery, Lucas, was proposing, in front of the entire town, in the middle of a council meeting meant to destroy her. This wasn't romance, it was strategy. A way to end the scandal, to protect his practice and her livelihood. A business arrangement dressed up as a proposal. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something beyond strategy. Respect. Partnership. The acknowledgement that they worked well together, that they could build something solid on that foundation. It wasn't love. Not the wild, passionate love she'd had with Samuel, but maybe it was something better suited to the life she was building. Something stable and honest and real. Clara's voice came out rough. She cleared her throat and tried again, addressing not just Lucas, but the entire room. Dr. Avery, are you certain this isn't necessary? I'm certain, he said firmly. Not because I have to be, because I want to be, because I've been alone for a long time and I'm tired of it, because I think we could be good for each other, because your children deserve a stable home and you deserve a partner who sees your worth. He smiled slightly, the expression transforming his serious face. And because I very much don't want to resign from the only work I know how to do. Despite everything, the tension, the fear, the shock, Clara felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. It escaped as a half-sob, half-giggle that sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. Then, yes, she heard herself say, yes, I'll marry you. The room's reaction was mixed. Some people cheered, others looked scandalized. Thomas Whitfield's face had gone an alarming shade of purple. The council members huddled together, whispering frantically. Mayor Harrison banged his gavel one more time. Well, I think that resolves the immediate concern about propriety. All in favor of tabling the motion regarding Mrs. Rowan's employment? 4 hands went up slowly. Thomas Whitfield sat with his arms crossed, refusing to vote. Motion tabled, the mayor said, looking relieved. This meeting is adjourned. People swarmed them immediately. Mrs. Walsh hugged Clara tight, whispering congratulations. Mr. Walsh shook Lucas's hand with a knowing smile. Martha looked torn between triumph and concern, her sharp eyes assessing Lucas carefully. Through it all, Clara stood beside her new fiancé, her hand somehow finding his, their fingers intertwining with surprising ease. This wasn't how she'd imagined her second marriage proposal. There was no moonlight, no romance, no privacy. Just a public declaration in front of a hostile crowd, a strategic move that happened to solve multiple problems at once. But as Lucas's thumb brushed over her knuckles in a gesture that seemed unconscious, Clara felt something shift in her chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe partnership and respect were better foundations than passion anyway. Maybe this unexpected proposal, born of crisis and necessity, could become something real. Thomas Whitfield pushed through the crowd, his face still flushed with anger. This is absurd. A marriage of convenience, clearly designed to circumvent the council's legitimate concerns. The council has no concerns, Lucas said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. The council just voted to table the motion, and what Mrs. Rowan and I choose to do with our personal lives is, as Martha said, none of your business. You're making a mistake, Thomas hissed. Both of you. Clara looked at the man who'd rejected her 4 months ago. The man who'd promised her safety and then snatched it away the moment she became inconvenient. The man who'd tried to destroy the new life she'd built from those ashes. The only mistake I made, she said clearly, was believing you were a good man. I won't make that error again. She turned away from him, dismissing him as thoroughly as he'd once dismissed her. It felt better than she'd imagined. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Lucas guided her toward the door with a gentle hand on her small of her back. Martha fell into step beside them, Violet trailing behind with barely contained excitement. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen, Martha muttered. Possibly both. Probably both, Lucas agreed. He glanced at Clara. We should talk. About practicalities, expectations, how this will actually work. Tomorrow, Clara said, suddenly exhausted. Tonight, I just want to go home and hold my babies and try to believe this actually happened. Tomorrow then. Lucas stopped at the town hall steps. Mrs. Rowan, Clara, I meant what I said. This isn't just strategy. I think we could be good partners. In medicine and in life. I think so too, Clara said softly, and meant it. She walked back to the boarding house with Martha and Violet, the winter air sharp in her lungs and the sky overhead scattered with more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston. Behind her, Red Willow's lights twinkled in windows and along streets. Ahead, the boarding house glowed warm and welcoming. Somewhere in that house, her twins slept peacefully, unaware that their lives had just changed irrevocably, that they would have a father now, not by blood, but by choice, that their mother had just fought for her dignity in front of an entire town and won. Clara touched her lips, feeling the ghost of words she'd spoken. Yes, I'll marry you. 4 months ago, she'd stood on a train platform and watched her dreams crumble. Tonight, she'd stood in a town hall and built new ones from the rubble. Dreams that didn't depend on someone else's charity or validation. Dreams that were hers, earned through work and courage, and refusing to be erased. You all right? Martha asked quietly as they reached the boarding house steps. Clara thought about the question, about Thomas Whitfield's purple face and the council's grudging vote, about Lucas's steady hand in hers and the work waiting at the clinic tomorrow, about her babies sleeping upstairs and the life she was building, piece by hard-won piece. Yes, she said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I'm more than all right. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And for the first time since Samuel died, Clara Rowan walked into her future with her head held high and hope burning steady in her chest. Morning brought reality with it, as mornings have a habit of doing. Clara woke to Emma's demanding cry and the pale February sunlight that made everything look sharper, more defined. Last night she'd accepted a marriage proposal in front of half the town. Today she had to figure out what that actually meant. She fed the twins mechanically, her mind spinning through implications. A wedding would need to be planned. Living arrangements sorted. The twins would have a father, Lucas would have a ready-made family, and she would have… what? Security, certainly. Partnership, he'd promised. But what else? What did marriage look like when it was built on mutual need rather than passion? A knock at her door interrupted these spiraling thoughts. Martha entered without waiting for permission, carrying a tea tray and wearing an expression that suggested she'd been up half the night thinking. He's downstairs, she said without preamble. Been waiting in the parlor for 20 minutes. Says he'll wait as long as you need, but I told him you'd be down once the babies were settled. Clara's stomach lurched. I don't know what to say to him. Then listen instead. That man didn't propose on a whim, Clara. He's thought this through, probably more carefully than you have. Martha set down the tray and fixed Clara with a pointed look. And before you go spinning stories about being a burden or an obligation, remember that Lucas Avery doesn't do anything out of pity. He proposed because he wants to. The question is whether you want to or whether you're just accepting because it solves problems. The words hit home. Clara thought about Lucas's steady hands during procedures, the way he explained medical concepts to her without condescension, the quiet competence he brought to everything. She thought about working beside him these past months, learning to anticipate what he needed before he asked. There was respect between them, genuine liking. Was that enough foundation for a marriage? It was more than she'd had with Thomas Whitfield, who'd made promises in letters and broken them in person. At least Lucas's proposal had been honest, practical, real. She dressed carefully, choosing the same outfit she'd worn to the town meeting, armor disguised as respectability. The twins were settled in their basket, drowsy after feeding. Clara touched their soft heads gently, drawing courage from their solid existence, then headed downstairs. Lucas stood when she entered the parlor, his posture formal but his eyes warm. He'd changed from last night's clothes into fresh ones, but he looked like he'd slept about as well as Clara had, which was to say, hardly at all. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I'm not too early. I wanted to talk before the day got away from us." "Of course." Clara sat in the chair Martha had vacated, grateful for the small table between them that felt like appropriate distance. "About last night, I owe you an apology." Lucas cut her off, surprising her. "That proposal was public and rushed and entirely unfair to you. You deserved better, privacy, time to think, a choice made without an audience watching." "You were protecting us both," Clara said carefully. "Protecting your practice. I understood that." "Yes, but understanding strategy doesn't mean you weren't pressured by it." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "So I'm here this morning to ask properly, without the council or Thomas Whitfield or anyone else influencing your answer. Clara, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara searched his face, looking for hints of obligation or reluctance. She found neither, just honest inquiry and something that looked like hope. "Why?" she asked. "Not the strategy, not the practical reasons. Why do you want this?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "I told you I lost my wife and daughter to cholera. What I didn't tell you was how alone I've been since. Medicine kept me busy, kept me useful, but it didn't keep me company. I'd resigned myself to that loneliness, convinced myself it was enough to help people and come home to an empty house." He refocused on Clara, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes that she'd never glimpsed before. "Then you started working with me, and I remembered what it felt like to have a partner, someone who understood the weight of medical work, who could share the burden of difficult cases, someone who made my clinic feel less like a lonely outpost and more like a place where good things happened. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Clara's throat tightened. "Your daughter, how old was she?" 3. "Sarah. Same name as the Chen girl." A sad smile crossed his face. "Maybe that's why I was so quick to help when she came to the clinic. My Sarah would have been 17 now if she'd lived. I like to think she would have grown into someone brave, like you." The comparison startled Clara. "I'm not brave, I'm just stubborn." Bravery and stubbornness often look the same from the outside. Lucas's smile gained a bit of warmth. "You stood up to an entire town council. You speak your mind even when it costs you. You work yourself to exhaustion, caring for your children and helping strangers. If that's not bravery, I don't know what is." Clara thought about this, about the difference between courage and desperation. "I help because I have to. Because I can't afford not to work, can't afford to be anything less than useful. And I practice medicine because I have to. Because after my family died, healing others was the only thing that made me feel human." Lucas spread his hands. "We all have reasons for what we do. That doesn't make the doing any less valuable." They sat in silence for a moment, the winter morning light streaming through Martha's lace curtains. From upstairs came the faint sound of the twins stirring, and from the kitchen, the clatter of dishes as Violet started breakfast preparations. "If we do this," Clara said slowly, "I need to know what you expect. Are we talking about a partnership, a true marriage, or just a legal arrangement for appearances?" Lucas considered this carefully. I'm talking about a real marriage. Shared home, shared life, shared responsibilities. I won't claim to offer you passion. I buried that with my first wife. But I can offer you respect, partnership, and a stable home for your children. Over time, perhaps we'll find affection too. I'd like that. The twins, Clara said. They're not your children. They'll call another man father even though they never knew him. That's a lot to take on. I know, but I've watched you with them these past months. I've seen how fiercely you love them, how carefully you protect them. Any man would be lucky to help raise children like that. He paused. I won't try to replace their father, Clara, but I can be present for them in ways he can't. I can teach them things, protect them, watch them grow. That's enough for me. Clara felt something crack open in her chest, some protective shell she'd built around her heart. This man, this quiet, serious doctor who'd lost everything and kept working anyway, was offering her children a father, not out of obligation or pity, but because he genuinely seemed to want the role. What about more children? The question came out before she could stop it, heat flooding her face. Lucas didn't look away, didn't make her feel foolish for asking. I'd welcome them if they came, but I won't demand them. You've been through enough with pregnancy and childbirth. That decision should be yours. The answer was so reasonable, so respectful, that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Samuel had been a good husband, but he'd been young and thoughtless in the way of young men. He'd never asked what she wanted, never considered that her body and choices might be her own. Lucas, older and tempered by loss, understood things Samuel never had. I need time, Clara said finally. Not to decide. I've already decided. But to adjust to the idea. To make sure this is real and not just crisis management. How much time? A month? Long enough to be sure, but not so long that people start talking again. Clara managed a weak smile. Is that fair? It's more than fair. Lucas stood, extending his hand formally. A month from today, then. We'll marry at the church if that suits you. Nothing elaborate. Just witnessed and official. Clara took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of medical work, the strength in his grip. A small ceremony sounds perfect. I've had enough of being the center of attention. Then we're agreed. He held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in that same unconscious gesture from last night. In the meantime, you'll continue working at the clinic, and we should probably discuss living arrangements. My house has room for all of us, but it'll need preparation. You have a house? Clara realized she knew almost nothing about his life outside the clinic. Small one, edge of town. 2 bedrooms currently, but there's space to add on. I've been meaning to expand it anyway. Never had reason before. His expression turned almost shy. Would you want to see it before you commit to living there? They made the visit that afternoon, with Martha watching the twins and Violet coming along as chaperone to maintain propriety. The house sat on a quiet street lined with young cottonwood trees, modest but well-maintained. Inside, it was exactly what Clara expected from Lucas. Clean, organized, almost austere. The furniture was functional rather than decorative. The kitchen was equipped for basic cooking, but clearly used by someone who ate for necessity rather than pleasure. It needs a woman's touch, Violet said diplomatically, eyeing the bare walls and lack of curtains. It needs life, Clara corrected gently. She walked through the rooms, imagining the twins playing on these floors, meals shared at that simple table, medical texts scattered across the desk in what would become their shared study. But it has good bones. We can make it a home. Lucas's expression brightened. The second bedroom is currently my study, but I can move those things elsewhere. The twins can have it until they're old enough to need separate rooms, and then we'll build an addition. Where will you put your books? We'll share the study. You'll need space too, for medical texts, notes on patients, your own learning. He showed her the room, which was indeed packed floor to ceiling with books and papers. I've been meaning to organize this anyway. It'll be better with 2 of us working here. The casual assumption that she would continue learning, continue working, loosened another knot of tension in Clara's chest. This wasn't a man who expected his wife to abandon her ambitions for domesticity. This was a partner who wanted her skills to grow alongside his. Over the following weeks, Red Willow adjusted to the engagement with varying degrees of grace. Some people, like the Walshes and Martha's regular boarders, were genuinely happy. Others remained suspicious, convinced the marriage was scandalous somehow, even though it solved the very problem they'd complained about. Thomas Whitfield avoided both Clara and Lucas entirely, his pride apparently too wounded to acknowledge their existence. Clara found she didn't care. She was too busy preparing for a wedding, managing the boarding house work, and continuing her clinic duties. Lucas had been right. Having a shared purpose made the days feel less burdensome. They fell into an easy rhythm, discussing patients over meals, debating treatment approaches while walking between the clinic and boarding house, learning each other's working styles with increasing efficiency. But there were awkward moments too. The time Lucas accidentally walked in while Clara was nursing the twins, both of them freezing in mortified silence before he backed out stammering apologies. The evening he tried to discuss the wedding night, and Clara's face went so red he immediately changed subjects. The careful distance they maintained in public, hyper-aware that any appearance of impropriety could reignite the scandal. "You're both being ridiculous," Martha declared one evening, watching them sit on opposite ends of her parlor sofa like bookends. "You're getting married in 2 weeks. You're allowed to sit next to each other." "We're being careful," Lucas said. "You're being terrified," Martha corrected. "Of what? I'm not sure. Each other? The town? Your own feelings?" Clara and Lucas exchanged glances, and Clara saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe they were letting fear, of gossip, of making mistakes, of vulnerability, keep them apart when they should be building closeness. "I don't know how to do this," Clara admitted quietly. "How to let someone in again after losing someone. How to trust that this won't fall apart like everything else." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he shifted across the sofa until he sat beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I don't know either," he said. "My first marriage was young love, passionate and reckless, and perfect until it ended. This is different. We're different." "Maybe that means we get to make our own rules about how it works." Clara looked at him, really looked at this man who would soon be her husband. The gray at his temples, the lines around his eyes from squinting at wounds in lamplight, the careful way he held himself as if always prepared for bad news. He'd survived terrible loss and kept going. So had she. Maybe that shared survival was its own kind of foundation. Slowly, carefully, she let her hand rest on the sofa between them. An offering, an opening. Lucas looked at it, then covered it with his own. His hand was warm and solid, and Clara felt something in her chest release slightly. This was real. This person was real. This fragile beginning of partnership was something they could build on. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "Together," Lucas agreed. The wedding took place on a gray March morning that promised spring but hadn't quite delivered it. Clara wore a simple blue dress that Violet had helped her alter, nothing fancy but clean and pressed. The twins were bundled in their best clothes, outfits Martha had sewn specially, declaring that if she was going to watch these babies become someone's children, they'd at least look presentable doing it. The church was half full, which was more than Clara expected. Mr. and Mrs. Walsh sat in the front row, both beaming. The boarding house residents had come, along with several of Lucas's patients and their families. Even Sarah Chen was there, her pregnancy just starting to show, watching with tears in her eyes as the woman who'd helped her watched another chance at happiness. Reverend Matthews kept the ceremony brief and simple, exactly as they'd requested. The vows were traditional, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and health. Clara's voice shook on, "Until death do us part," memories of Samuel's funeral threatening to overwhelm her. But Lucas's hand tightened on hers, anchoring her to this moment, this choice, this new beginning. When the Reverend pronounced them married, Lucas kissed her carefully, respectfully, as if she were something precious that might break. It wasn't passionate, but it was warm and real and full of promise. The town's reaction was mixed, predictably. Some people congratulated them with genuine warmth. Others offered stiff pleasantries that barely masked their continued disapproval. And Thomas Whitfield, glimpsed briefly across the street as they left the church, turned away without acknowledgement. "His loss," Martha muttered, loud enough for several people to hear. "That man rejected a pearl and married himself to fool's gold instead." The comment made Clara laugh, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly.
Lucas looked at her with surprise and pleasure, as if her laughter was a gift he hadn't expected. "What's funny?" "Everything. Nothing. I'm married again." Clara looked down at the twins in her arms, then up at her new husband. 3 months ago I had nothing. Now I have everything." "Not everything yet," Lucas said quietly, "but we're building toward it." They spent the wedding night at Lucas's house, their house now, with the twins sleeping peacefully in their new nursery. Clara stood in the doorway of the bedroom she would share with Lucas, her heart pounding with nervousness that felt ridiculous given that she'd been married before, had borne children, was hardly an innocent girl. Lucas appeared behind her, changed from his wedding clothes into a simple shirt and trousers. "We don't have to," he said gently. "We can take our time with this part. There's no rush." Clara appreciated the offer, truly, but taking time felt like postponing the inevitable, and she'd learned that postponement just drew out the anxiety. Better to step forward and see what this new marriage would feel like in all its dimensions. "I want to," she said, turning to face him. "I'm nervous, but I want to try." What followed was gentle and careful and sometimes awkward in the way of people learning each other's bodies and boundaries. Lucas was patient, attentive to her responses, stopping to ask if things were all right so often that Clara finally had to tell him to stop asking and just trust her to speak up if needed. It wasn't the passionate reunion she'd had with Samuel when he came home from work trips, but it was kind and real and left her feeling held rather than used. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Lucas's breathing evening out beside her, Clara felt tears slip down her temples. Not sad tears exactly, more like release. She'd been holding herself so tightly for so long, since Samuel's death, maybe even before, holding herself together through grief and poverty and fear and the constant pressure to be strong enough, good enough, worthy enough. Tonight, in this bed with this patient man, she could let go of some of that tension. "Clara?" Lucas's voice was drowsy but concerned. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she whispered. "I'm just... yes." His arm came around her waist, pulling her closer. It was nice, she thought. Not earth-shattering, but nice. Comforting. Like coming in from the cold to find a fire already burning. Maybe that was enough. Maybe nice and comfortable and real were better foundations than passion anyway. The days that followed brought new rhythms. Clara woke in Lucas's bed, their bed, and helped him prepare for the day's clinic work. They had breakfast together, discussing the patient scheduled that morning. She'd nurse the twins while he reviewed his notes, and they'd walk to the clinic together, her carrying the babies in their basket while he carried his medical bag. Martha had agreed to watch the twins during clinic hours, an arrangement that benefited everyone. The babies got steady care, Martha got company and help with lighter tasks, and Clara got to work without constant worry about Emma and James. It wasn't perfect. Clara still rushed through lunch to nurse them, still felt the pull of maternal anxiety every time they cried. But it worked well enough. The clinic itself thrived with 2 people running it. Clara took on more responsibilities, managing supplies, keeping records, even assisting with minor procedures independently when Lucas was occupied with another patient. He taught her constantly, explaining diagnoses and treatment options with the thoroughness of a natural teacher. She absorbed it all hungrily, this knowledge that made her feel competent and valuable. But the town still watched, still whispered. Clara heard fragments of it everywhere. Playing at being a doctor now, is she? Unnatural for a woman to be so interested in medicine. What kind of mother spends her time stitching wounds instead of with her babies? I heard Dr. Avery only married her because she trapped him with that scene at the council meeting. The criticisms stung, but they didn't stop Clara. She'd learned that people would judge regardless of her actions. The only thing she could control was whether she let their judgment change her course. Still, there were moments when the weight of constant scrutiny felt crushing, like the afternoon Mrs. Carson, wife of the boarding house resident who never acknowledged Clara, came to the clinic with her daughter, who'd developed a terrible cough. The woman's lips were pressed thin with disapproval as Clara examined the girl, checking her breathing and temperature with Lucas supervising. "Are you sure she knows what she's doing?" Mrs. Carson asked Lucas directly, as if Clara weren't standing right there. "Quite sure," Lucas said mildly. "Mrs. Avery has assisted with dozens of cases. Your daughter is in excellent hands." "Mrs. Avery?" The woman made the title sound like an insult. I suppose that makes it proper now, though we all know why you really married her. Lucas's expression went cold in a way Clara had never seen. I married her because she's intelligent, skilled, and kind, because she makes my life and work better, and because I wanted to. If you have concerns about her competence, I suggest you take your daughter elsewhere for treatment, but you'll find no one in this territory more capable. Mrs. Carson left in a huff, dragging her still coughing daughter with her. Clara wanted to feel triumphant. Lucas had defended her beautifully, but she mostly felt tired. How long would she have to prove herself? How many times would she need to demonstrate her worth before people simply accepted it? Don't let her get to you, Lucas said after they left. Some people are determined to be miserable. You can't fix that. I know. I just wish... Clara trailed off, not sure how to finish. You wish they'd see you the way I do. Lucas touched her shoulder gently. They will, eventually. You're building a reputation with every patient you help. It just takes time. Time. Claire was learning that time was both gift and thief out here. Time healed wounds and built trust, but it also dragged when you were waiting for acceptance. When you were constantly proving yourself worthy of basic respect. But there were bright moments, too. Like the day Mrs. Patterson, the woman Clara had helped on her second clinic visit, stopped her on the street to show off her fully healed leg. I'm walking without pain for the first time in months. The doctor said it's because you held me together when he cleaned the wound. Thank you, Mrs. Avery. Or the morning little Thomas Murphy came back to have his stitches removed, his hand healed with only a thin scar. He'd brought Clara a carved wooden horse he had made himself with his good hand, pressed it into her palm with a shy smile. For the twins, since you saved my hand so I could make it. These moments of gratitude, of recognition, they sustained Clara through the criticism, reminded her why she was doing this work even when it was hard. At home, she and Lucas settled into married life with surprising ease. They were both naturally tidy people, both accustomed to living alone and managing their own spaces. There were small adjustments. Lucas learned to leave the bathroom free during the times Clara needed to nurse. Clara learned not to reorganize his carefully ordered medical books. They developed routines around each other like water-finding channels. The twins took to Lucas with baby indifference that gradually warmed into recognition. He held them carefully at first, as if afraid of breaking something precious. But Clara taught him the confident grip babies responded to, and soon he could soothe James's fussing almost as well as she could. Emma remained Clara's girl, demanding her mother's attention with imperious cries. But even she tolerated Lucas's careful ministrations. She has your determination, Lucas observed one evening, watching Emma refuse to sleep despite obvious exhaustion. That stubborn set to her jaw. God help us all when she's old enough to argue, Clara said, rocking the baby with practiced efficiency. Lucas laughed, the sound warm and genuine. He laughed more easily now than he had when they first met, Clara noticed, as if her presence and the baby's chaos was loosening something that had been held too tight for too long. In quiet moments, usually late at night after the twins were finally asleep, they talked about their pasts, their hopes, the strange path that had brought them together. Lucas told her about his first wife, Catherine, who'd been lovely and fragile and completely unprepared for frontier life. She hated it here, he admitted. The isolation, the lack of culture, the constant work. She was trying to convince me to return east when the cholera came. I've always wondered if she'd have lived if we'd left sooner. You can't know that, Clara said gently. Cholera strikes cities as much as frontier towns, maybe more. Maybe, but I'll always wonder. He was quiet for a moment. What was Samuel like? Clara considered the question carefully. Young, enthusiastic about everything. His work, his life, me. He was a clerk in a shipping office, always convinced the next promotion was coming. It never did, but he never stopped hoping. She smiled sadly. He would have loved the twins, would have been a wonderful father, probably too indulgent, but he never got the chance. I'm sorry. Me too, but I'm also... Clara hesitated, then decided honesty was worth the risk. I'm grateful for this, for you. I loved Samuel, but this feels more solid somehow, like we're building something that won't collapse at the first hard wind. Lucas took her hand, threading their fingers together. It was becoming a familiar gesture, this quiet hand-holding in the darkness. I feel that too. We're partners in this, Clara. Equals. I hope you know that. She did know it, could feel it in every interaction, the way he asked her opinion on difficult cases, the way he trusted her judgment with patience, the way he split household decisions equally, never assuming his word was final simply because he was the husband. It was so different from what she'd expected of marriage, so different from the stories she'd heard of women subsumed entirely into their husbands' lives. This was something new, something built on mutual respect and shared purpose.
And Clara found herself falling into it with relief and growing affection.
I know, she said simply, and I'm grateful for it every day. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, while outside their window Red Willow settled into night. Somewhere out there, people were still gossiping about them, still questioning her propriety and his judgment, still waiting for the scandal to unfold. But in this house, in this bed, with this patient man beside her and her children sleeping in the next room, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since Samuel died. She felt home. Not a perfect home. Not a home without challenges or fears or uncertainties, but home nonetheless. A place built on honesty and partnership and the determination to keep building even when it was hard. And that, Clara thought as she drifted toward sleep, was more than enough to fight for.
Spring came to Red Willow with sudden force, transforming the brown landscape into something green and hopeful. The twins were 6 months old now, plump and healthy, beginning to sit up on their own and babble in that mysterious language only babies understood. Emma had Lucas wrapped around her tiny finger, crying dramatically whenever he left for work until he returned to kiss her forehead one more time. James was quieter, more observant, but his face lit up whenever Lucas entered a room in a way that made Clara's heart squeeze. They were becoming a family. Not the family Clara had imagined back in Boston, and certainly not the one she dreamed of when answering Thomas Whitfield's advertisement, but a real family nonetheless, built on shared work and growing affection and the 1,000 small kindnesses that accumulated into love. The clinic had become Clara's second home. She knew where every instrument lived, could anticipate Lucas's needs during procedures before he voiced them, had developed her own rapport with regular patients. Women especially had started requesting her specifically for certain concerns, childbirth questions, female complaints they were too embarrassed to discuss with a male doctor. Clara handled these consultations with the same careful competence Lucas had taught her, and slowly, grudgingly, even the most skeptical townspeople began to acknowledge her skill. But acceptance was a slow river, and not everyone was willing to wade in. The confrontation Clara had been half expecting finally came on a warm April morning. She was at the clinic alone, Lucas having been called out to the Halverson ranch where their youngest son had broken his arm. A woman Clara didn't recognize appeared in the doorway, her face twisted with something between desperation and anger. "You're the one they call Mrs.
Avery?" The woman's voice was harsh, accusatory. "I am. How can I help you?" "You can stop playing doctor and admit what you really are." The woman stepped into the clinic, and Clara saw she was shaking. "You're a fraud, a charlatan who tricked a good man into marriage so you could pretend to be something you're not." Clara's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm Dr. Avery's wife and medical assistant. I've trained under him for nearly 6 months now. If you have a medical concern, I'm happy to help or to schedule an appointment when my husband returns." "I don't want your help. I want you to admit you killed my sister." The words hit like a physical blow. Clara gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "I don't know what you're talking about. Who was your sister?" "Margaret Carson. She came here with her daughter 3 weeks ago. You examined the girl, said it was just a cough. A week later, Margaret came down with the same illness. She died yesterday." The woman's eyes were red-rimmed but fierce. "My sister would have lived if she'd gotten proper medical care. Instead, she got you." Clara's mind raced back to that appointment. Mrs. Carson and her coughing daughter. She'd examined the girl thoroughly, checked her breathing, her temperature, her throat. It had been a simple respiratory infection, nothing serious. She'd recommended rest, fluids, steam treatments, standard care for a childhood cough. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss," Clara said carefully, "but your niece had a common cold. There was nothing to suggest it would develop into something more serious."
Because you didn't know what you were looking for. You're not a real doctor. You're just some desperate widow who convinced Lucas Avery to let you play with medical equipment. The woman's voice rose. My sister trusted this clinic. She thought because you were married to a doctor, you must know something. But you don't. You're a fraud, and now Margaret is dead because of it. That's enough. The new voice came from the doorway, calm but carrying unmistakable authority. Lucas stood there, his medical bag still in hand, his expression carved from stone. Mrs. Brennan, I understand you're grieving, but making accusations against my wife won't bring your sister back. Your wife killed her. Your sister died of pneumonia, Lucas said quietly, stepping into the clinic. I examined her body myself this morning. Pneumonia that developed from what began as a simple cold in her daughter. The same daughter my wife examined and correctly diagnosed 3 weeks ago. But there is no treatment that would have saved your sister once the pneumonia took hold, Lucas continued, his voice gentle despite the steel underneath. I've seen dozens of cases like hers. The infection moves too fast, settles too deep in the lungs. Even if I had been the one to examine her daughter, even if we'd started treatment immediately, Margaret would likely still have died. That's the terrible truth of medicine. Sometimes we can't save people no matter how hard we try. Mrs. Brennan's face crumpled. She can't just be gone. She was only 32. She had 3 children. How am I supposed to tell them their mother died from a cold? Lucas's expression softened. He guided the woman to a chair with the same gentle competence he brought to all patient interactions. You tell them the truth. That sometimes people get sick, and even though doctors do everything they can, the illness is stronger. That their mother didn't suffer at the end. That you'll help take care of them because that's what family does. The woman sobbed into her hands, grief overwhelming anger. Clara stood frozen, her heart still pounding from the accusation. She wanted to defend herself further, to explain every detail of that examination, to prove she'd done everything right. But she also understood that Mrs. Brennan didn't really want explanations. She wanted her sister back, and since that was impossible, she wanted someone to blame. Lucas caught Clara's eye over the crying woman's head. His expression was steady, supportive, completely trusting. He knew she'd done nothing wrong. That certainty in his gaze helped Clara breathe again. After Mrs. Brennan left, her anger spent, replaced by exhausted grief, Clara sank into a chair and put her face in her hands. What if she's right? What if I missed something? You didn't. Lucas knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I reviewed your notes from that appointment. Your examination was thorough, your diagnosis correct, your treatment recommendations appropriate. What happened to Margaret Carson was tragic but not preventable. Do you understand that? But she died, and that's not your fault. Clara, listen to me. Lucas's hands tightened on hers. Medicine is full of cases we can't fix, illnesses we can't cure, patients we lose despite doing everything right. If you're going to continue this work, you have to make peace with that reality. You have to learn the difference between making a mistake and simply being unable to prevent tragedy. Clara looked into his face, saw the old grief there beneath the professional calm. How many patients have you lost? Hundreds, if you count the cholera epidemic. Dozens since then. Each one hurts. Each one makes me question everything I did, wonder if I could have done more. He paused. But I can't let that stop me from treating the next patient. Neither can you. What if people believe her? What if this gives them ammunition to say I shouldn't be working here? Then we'll deal with it, together. Lucas stood, pulling her up with him. But I won't let fear of gossip or criticism keep you from doing work you're good at. You're too valuable, to this clinic, to me, to this town, whether they realize it yet or not. The words settled into Clara's chest like warmth spreading through cold water. He believed in her, not conditionally, not with reservations, but completely. That belief was a gift more precious than she'd known how to ask for. But Mrs. Brennan's visit was just the beginning. Over the next week, Clara felt the shift in how certain people treated her. Sidelong glances at the general store. Whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Even at church, she noticed several families sitting farther away than usual, as if tragedy might be contagious. The criticism came to a head at the next town council meeting. Clara wasn't there. She was home with the twins, but Lucas attended and came back with his jaw tight and his eyes blazing.
Thomas Whitfield raised the issue of your medical work again, he said without preamble. Used Margaret Carson's death as evidence that you're unqualified. 3 other council members supported him. They want me to stop allowing you to examine patients independently. Clara's heart sank. What did you say? I told them that you work under my direct supervision, that you've never examined a patient I haven't reviewed, and that the Carson case was not medical negligence, but an unavoidable tragedy. Lucas paced their small parlor, agitation evident in every movement. I told them that in 6 months, you've helped me treat over 200 patients. That infant mortality has dropped because women feel comfortable coming to you with pregnancy concerns they wouldn't raise with me. That your presence has expanded access to medical care for half the population. And they don't care. They want you to stop medical work entirely, or at least limit yourself to what they consider appropriate tasks. Changing bandages, mixing medicines, cleaning instruments, nothing that requires actual medical judgment. The words hit Clara like stones. After everything she'd learned, after all the patients she'd helped, they wanted to reduce her to a glorified cleaning woman, to strip away the very thing that made her feel competent and valuable. Maybe I should agree, she said quietly. If it's causing this much trouble, no. Lucas stopped pacing and faced her directly. No, Clara. I won't let them do this to you. You've earned your place in that clinic through hard work and skill. You've saved lives. You've made a real difference. I won't stand by while small-minded fools try to take that away because it makes them uncomfortable. But the council has no legal authority over my medical practice. They can make suggestions, but they can't compel me to follow them. His expression was fierce. The only person who can decide your role at the clinic is me, and I'm deciding that nothing changes. You continue doing exactly what you've been doing. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You could lose support in this town, lose patients who don't want to be treated by a woman. Then they'll find another doctor. There's one in Butte, only 40 miles away. Lucas came to her, taking her hands the way he did when he needed her to really hear him. Clara, I'm not giving you up. Not your skills, not your partnership, not your presence. You make me a better doctor. You make this practice better. That's worth more than the approval of Thomas Whitfield and his cronies. The fierce protectiveness in his voice cracked something open in Clara's chest. This man, this quiet, careful doctor who measured every word and action, was willing to fight the entire town for her. Not because he had to, but because he believed she was worth fighting for. I love you, she said suddenly, the words escaping before she'd consciously decided to speak them. Lucas froze, his eyes widening. What? I love you. Clara said it again, more certainly this time. I know this started as strategy, as partnership, but somewhere along the way it became more. You're my best friend and my partner and the person I trust most in the world. I love you, Lucas Avery. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then his face transformed, joy breaking across it like sunrise. I love you too. God, Clara, I've loved you for weeks, but I didn't want to pressure you, didn't want you to feel obligated to return feelings I knew you hadn't signed up for. She kissed him to stop the nervous rambling, pressing her mouth to his with more confidence than she'd felt on their wedding night. His arms came around her immediately, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something warm and real and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. We're going to get through this. The council, the gossip, all of it, together. Together, Clara agreed. But getting through it proved harder than either anticipated. Over the next weeks, pressure mounted from multiple directions. Several patients specifically requested that Lucas examine them rather than Clara, even for conditions she was perfectly capable of diagnosing. The whisper campaign about Margaret Carson's death grew louder, with some people claiming Clara had been negligent, others saying she'd been practicing medicine without proper training. Thomas Whitfield remained the loudest voice against her, using every council meeting to raise concerns about her role. His persistence puzzled Clara until Martha explained it over tea one afternoon. He can't stand that you've built a good life after he rejected you, Martha said bluntly. Every time he sees you successful and respected, it reminds him of his own poor judgment. So he's trying to tear you down to make himself feel better about the choice he made. That's petty and cruel.
Yes, and also very human. Martha refilled Clara's cup. People hate being proven wrong. Thomas made a public show of rejecting you, convinced he was making the smart choice. The fact that you've thrived without him is an indictment of his judgment. He can't accept that, so he's working to make you fail. But Clara wasn't failing. Despite the criticism, despite the pressure, she continued her work at the clinic with Lucas's full support. And slowly, grudgingly, results began to speak louder than gossip. When Mrs. Walsh went into premature labor with her fourth pregnancy, it was Clara who kept her calm through 18 hours of difficult delivery while Lucas handled the medical interventions. The baby survived, a tiny girl they named Hope. And Mrs. Walsh told everyone who would listen that Clara's steady presence had kept her from panicking. When a mining accident brought 5 injured men to the clinic simultaneously, Clara managed 3 of them while Lucas handled the 2 most critical cases. She stitched wounds, set a dislocated shoulder, and kept all 3 men stable until Lucas could examine them. The mine foreman, watching her work, later told the town council that Mrs. Avery had likely saved 2 of his men's lives through her quick thinking. These successes accumulated like drops filling a bucket. They didn't silence the critics entirely, but they gave Clara's supporters ammunition to fight back with. And she had more supporters than she'd realized. Women who'd felt comfortable discussing medical concerns with her that they'd never raised with a male doctor, families who'd been treated kindly during emergencies, people who simply recognized competence when they saw it. The true turning point came on a bright June morning when Clara was alone at the clinic, Lucas having been called to assist with a difficult birth at a ranch 15 miles out. She was organizing supplies when the door burst open, and Pete, the young ranch hand who always made Emma smile, staggered in supporting another man whose face was gray with pain. "Mrs. Avery, thank God you're here. It's Mr. Whitfield. His horse threw him. I think he might be dying." Clara's stomach dropped as she saw who Pete was supporting. Thomas Whitfield, his fine clothes dusty and torn, blood seeping through his shirt from a wound she couldn't yet see. His face was ashen, his breathing shallow and rapid. For one terrible moment, Clara froze. This was the man who'd rejected her, humiliated her, spent months trying to destroy her reputation. The man who'd made her life in Red Willow harder than it needed to be at every opportunity. She could turn him away, claim she wasn't qualified to treat him, send him to Butte for medical care he might not survive the journey to reach. Then her medical training kicked in, overriding everything else. This wasn't Thomas Whitfield, the cruel merchant. This was a patient who needed help, and she was a medical professional who'd sworn, if only privately, to do no harm. "Get him on the examination table," she ordered Pete, moving immediately into assessment mode. What happened exactly? Horse spooked at a snake. Threw him hard. He hit a fence post on the way down. Pete helped Thomas onto the table, the injured man crying out in pain at the movement. He was unconscious at first, then came to but couldn't hardly breathe. I brought him straight here. Clara's hands were already examining the wound, her mind cataloging injuries with the systematic approach Lucas had taught her. The bleeding came from a deep gash in Thomas's side where he'd hit the fence post. But more concerning was his breathing, shallow, labored, with a wet sound that suggested internal damage. "Possible broken ribs, maybe a punctured lung," she muttered, more to herself than Pete. She pressed gently on Thomas's abdomen, watching his face. "Does this hurt?" Thomas tried to speak but couldn't get enough air. He nodded instead, pain evident in every line of his face. "Internal bleeding too, possibly." Clara's mind raced through treatment options. Lucas was at least 3 hours away, maybe more. The nearest other doctor was in Butte, a journey that would take half a day. Thomas needed treatment now, not hours from now, which meant Clara had to provide it. She'd assisted with dozens of emergency cases, had stitched and splinted and stabilized more patients than she could count. But she'd never been solely responsible for someone this critically injured. Never had to make these decisions entirely on her own. Fear threatened to paralyze her. What if she made the wrong choice? What if he died because she wasn't skilled enough? What if this gave her critics exactly the ammunition they needed to shut down her medical work forever? Then she looked at Thomas's face, saw the terror there beneath the pain, and the fear crystallized into focus. She couldn't let him die, couldn't stand by and watch someone suffer when she had the knowledge to help, regardless of who that person was or what he'd done to her. Pete, I need you to run to the boarding house and get Martha. Tell her to bring my medical supplies kit and meet me back here immediately. Then go find anyone who can ride fast and send them to the Halverson Ranch to get Dr. Avery. Run." Pete ran. Clara turned back to Thomas, forcing her voice into the calm, confident tone she'd learned from Lucas. "Mr. Whitfield, you're going to be all right, but I need to stabilize you until my husband can get here. I'm going to clean and bind your external wound first, then wrap your ribs to help your breathing. It's going to hurt. Understand?" Thomas nodded weakly, his eyes fixed on her face with an expression she'd never seen there before. Trust. Desperate, terrified trust. Clara worked quickly, cleaning the gash on his side with steady hands despite her racing heart. The wound was deep but relatively clean. She could stitch it closed, prevent infection, stop the worst of the bleeding. The ribs were harder. She bound them carefully, knowing she was walking a fine line between providing support and restricting breathing further. Martha arrived as Clara was finishing the stitches, took one look at the patient, and immediately began assisting without questions. Together they got Thomas positioned to help his breathing, monitored his vital signs, watched for deterioration that would mean internal bleeding they couldn't control. "You're doing everything right," Martha murmured during a quiet moment. "Lucas would be proud." "Lucas would know what I'm missing," Clara said, but she didn't stop working, couldn't stop, not until she was sure Thomas was stable. An hour passed, then 2. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing remaining labored but not worsening. The external bleeding had stopped. His color improved slightly, suggesting that if there was internal bleeding, it wasn't catastrophic. Clara talked to him during his conscious moments, keeping her voice steady and reassuring. "Stay with me, Mr. Whitfield. Dr. Avery is on his way. You're doing well. Just keep breathing." At one point, during a moment of clarity, Thomas caught her wrist weakly. "Why?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Why help me? After everything?" Clara looked at the man who'd caused her so much pain, who'd tried so hard to destroy what she'd built, and found she couldn't summon the anger anymore. Just exhaustion and a deep professional compassion. "Because you're a patient who needs help," she said simply. "That's reason enough." Tears leaked from the corners of Thomas's eyes. "I'm sorry for all of it. The platform, the council meetings, everything. I'm sorry." "We'll discuss it when you're better," Clara said, which was as close to acceptance as she could manage right now. "Rest. Save your strength." Lucas arrived 3 hours after the accident, bursting into the clinic with his face tight with worry. He took in the scene, Thomas stable on the examination table, Clara and Martha monitoring him carefully, supplies organized and ready for further intervention, and his expression shifted to something like awe. What happened? Clara gave him a concise medical report, detailing the injuries and her treatment. Lucas examined Thomas himself, checking her work with professional thoroughness. When he was done, he looked at Clara with undisguised pride. "You saved his life. If Pete had taken him to Butte, he would have died on the road. Your quick treatment stopped the bleeding and stabilized his breathing. Clara, this was extraordinary work." "I did what you taught me," Clara said, but she felt the validation sink into her bones. She'd done it. She'd handled a critical emergency alone and saved a life. Thomas was moved to the clinic's small recovery room where Lucas continued monitoring him. The punctured lung was real but minor, the internal bleeding minimal and already stopping. With proper care and rest, he'd make a full recovery. News of the accident spread through Red Willow with the speed of wildfire. By evening, half the town knew that Thomas Whitfield had been saved by the same woman he'd spent months trying to discredit. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Pete, in particular, seemed determined to tell everyone who would listen. Mrs. Avery didn't hesitate, not for a second. Didn't matter that Mr. Whitfield had been awful to her. She saw a man who needed help, and she provided it. That's what real doctors do. The story spread and evolved with each retelling. Some versions made Clara more heroic than she'd been, giving her credit for miraculous interventions she hadn't performed. But the core truth remained constant. She'd saved a life, had proven her competence in the most dramatic way possible. The town council held an emergency meeting 3 days later. This time, Clara was invited to attend. She entered the town hall with Lucas beside her, prepared for another fight. But the atmosphere was different than before. The council members looked uncomfortable rather than hostile. Even Thomas Whitfield's usual allies seemed unsure of their ground. Mayor Harrison cleared his throat. Mrs. Avery, we owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. We questioned your competence, your judgment, your right to practice medicine alongside your husband. Recent events have proven those concerns to be unfounded. More than unfounded, Mr. Walsh interrupted. He'd been added to the council recently, filling a vacancy. They were prejudiced and wrong. Mrs. Avery has demonstrated skill that most trained physicians would be proud of. The fact that she's a woman shouldn't disqualify her from recognition. We'd like to officially acknowledge your role at the clinic, Mayor Harrison continued, not as merely an assistant, but as a medical practitioner in your own right. With Dr. Avery's supervision, of course, but with full authority to examine and treat patients as you see fit. Clara felt Lucas's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. This was what they'd been fighting for, official recognition, the end of constant questioning and criticism. There's one condition, another council member added. Clara's stomach tightened, waiting for the catch. Mr. Whitfield has requested to speak. We felt it was only fair to hear him before making our decision final. Thomas entered the room, still moving carefully from his injuries. His face was pale and drawn, but his expression was determined. He walked to the front of the room and turned to face Clara directly. Mrs. Rowan, Mrs. Avery, I owe you my life, he said, his voice carrying despite its weakness. More than that, I owe you an apology that I should have offered months ago. I rejected you on that train platform because I was a coward and a fool. I saw challenges where I should have seen opportunity. I saw burden where I should have seen strength. The room was completely silent. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, feel the weight of everyone's attention. Thomas continued, When you started working at the clinic, I tried to stop it. Not because I genuinely believed you were unqualified, but because your success was proof of my failure. Every patient you helped, every life you saved, was evidence that I'd made the wrong choice. That the woman I'd rejected was worth 10 of me. I couldn't accept that, so I tried to destroy what you'd built. He paused, visibly gathering strength. But 3 days ago, when I was hurt and afraid, you didn't hesitate. You treated me with skill and compassion I didn't deserve. You saved my life even though I'd spent months trying to ruin yours. That's the kind of person you are. That's the kind of doctor you are. And this town would be lucky to have you officially recognized as such. Clara felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. She wouldn't cry, not here, not now. But Thomas's words were healing something she hadn't realized was still wounded. I'm asking the council to do more than just acknowledge Mrs. Avery's work, Thomas said, turning to face the other members. I'm asking them to formally apologize for the harassment and prejudice she's faced, and I'm personally pledging to support the clinic's expansion in any way I can, including financial contributions to fund proper training and equipment. The council members exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they nodded. Mayor Harrison stood. Then it's decided. Mrs. Clara Avery is hereby recognized as an official medical practitioner under the supervision of Dr. Lucas Avery. She has full authority to examine and treat patients at the clinic, and this council formally apologizes for any unwarranted criticism or obstacles placed in her path. The small crowd that had gathered for the meeting erupted in applause. Clara felt Lucas's arm come around her shoulders, felt Martha's hand squeeze her shoulder from the row behind them. This was victory. Not just personal vindication, but recognition that would protect her work going forward. After the meeting, Thomas approached her carefully. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends for the harm I caused. Clara studied the man who'd once rejected her so cruelly. He looked older now, diminished by injury and genuine remorse. She could hold on to anger, nurse the grudge that would be entirely justified. Or she could let it go and move forward into the future she'd built despite him. Forgiveness takes time, she said finally. But I appreciate the apology and the support for the clinic. It wasn't complete absolution, but it was a start, and that was enough. The months that followed brought transformation beyond Clara's wildest hopes. The clinic expanded, adding a second examination room and proper surgical space. Thomas Whitfield made good on his promise of financial support, contributing generously to equipment purchases and even funding the construction of a small medical library. Other donors followed his lead, and within 6 months, Red Willow had one of the best equipped frontier clinics in the territory. Clara's reputation grew alongside the clinics. Women came from neighboring towns specifically to see her, trusting her in ways they'd never trusted male doctors. She developed particular expertise in childbirth and women's health, while continuing to assist Lucas with general practice. They became a true medical team, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. The twins thrived, growing into active toddlers who turned the house into cheerful chaos. Emma remained imperious and demanding, while James developed into a thoughtful, gentle boy who could sit quietly for hours watching his parents work. Lucas loved them fiercely, and they loved him back without reservation. Clara sometimes forgot they weren't his by blood. The bond between them was so natural and strong. And somewhere in the midst of all this growth and change, the marriage that had started as strategy became something neither Clara nor Lucas had expected. Not the passionate, all-consuming love of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. Partnership that had grown into friendship, that had deepened into love. They worked together, laughed together, raised children together, and built a life that felt solid enough to weather any storm. Martha watched it all with undisguised satisfaction. "I knew you'd be all right," she told Clara one afternoon while they were watching the twins play in the clinic's waiting room. "From that first day on the platform, I knew you had what it took to survive here." "You saved me," Clara said. "If you hadn't taken us in, you'd have found another way. That's who you are." Martha smiled. "I just gave you a soft place to land while you figured out your next move. Everything after that, that was all you." A year after the town council's official recognition, Clara stood in the clinic one evening after the last patient had left. Lucas was in his office, finishing notes. The twins were with Violet at home. For a moment, Clara was alone with her thoughts and the physical evidence of everything she'd accomplished. Medical texts lined the shelves, some Lucas's, many now hers, purchased with money she'd earned through her own work. Examination tables stood ready for tomorrow's patients. Instruments gleamed in their cabinets, cleaned and organized by her own hands. This space was as much hers as Lucas's now, built through months of hard work and fierce determination. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train 14 months ago. That Clara had been desperate, frightened, willing to accept almost anything for the promise of security. She'd believed her value came from being chosen, from fitting into someone else's vision of what she should be. This Clara knew better. Her value came from within, from her skills, her compassion, her refusal to be diminished by other people's prejudices. She hadn't needed to be chosen. She'd chosen herself, had chosen this work, had chosen to fight for recognition rather than accept invisibility. Lucas appeared in the doorway, smiling at whatever he saw in her expression. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come," Clara said. "How different this is from what I expected." "Better or worse?" Clara looked at her husband, this good, steady man who'd seen her potential when she'd barely glimpsed it herself. She thought about her children sleeping safely in their beds, about the patients whose lives she'd helped save, about the future stretching out ahead of them, full of possibility. "Better," she said simply. "So much better than I ever dreamed." Lucas crossed to her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like home. "We're not done yet. There's still so much we can build together." "I know." Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "And I can't wait to see what comes next." Outside the clinic window, Red Willow settled into evening. Lights twinkled in windows up and down the street. The town clock struck 6. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked and children laughed and life continued its ordinary march forward. And in a small clinic at the edge of town, Clara Avery stood with her husband and contemplated the extraordinary life she'd built from the ashes of rejection. Not the life she'd planned, and certainly not the one she'd been promised by a merchant's carefully worded letters. But hers. Entirely, completely, wonderfully hers. The mail-order bride who'd been rejected had become a respected medical practitioner. The desperate widow had become a confident professional. The woman who'd believed she needed rescuing had discovered she could save herself, and countless others in the process. It was a better story than any fairy tale. It was real and hard-won and true. And as Clara looked toward the future, she knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. There were more patients to help, more skills to learn, more lives to touch. There were children to raise and a marriage to nurture and a community to serve. There was work to do, and Clara Avery had never been afraid of work. She smiled, squeezed Lucas's hand once more, and turned toward home. Toward the twins who were probably giving Violet a hard time about bedtime. Toward the house that had become warm with laughter and love. Toward the life she'd chosen and fought for and built with her own two hands. The journey from that train platform to this moment had been longer and harder than she'd ever imagined. But every step, every struggle, every small victory had led her here. To partnership and purpose. To love and belonging. To a place where she was valued not for being chosen, but for choosing to be exactly who she was meant to be. And that, Clara thought, as she walked into the gathering dusk with her husband beside her, was worth more than all the promises ever written in all the carefully composed letters in the world.